In the scorching Iraqi desert, Nurse Amy Leithern arrives at an archaeological dig to care for Louise Leidner, a woman tormented by mysterious noises and threatening letters from a past she thought was dead. As a cursed relic is unearthed, tensions flare among the dig team, jealousy, greed, and forbidden love simmering beneath the surface. When Louise is found murdered in a locked room, Hercule Poirot steps in to unravel a web of deception, where every suspect hides a secret and the relics. Dark power threatens more deaths. Will Poirot's genius crack the impossible crime before the killer strikes again? Chapter 1. Arrival at Hassanieh. Sun hung low over the horizon, a molten disk casting a golden haze across the barren plains of Iraq. The air was thick with heat, a dry, suffocating warmth that clung to the skin and made every breath feel like an effort. Nurse Amy Leithern sat in the back of a dusty, rattling car, her suitcase wedged beside her as the vehicle trundled along the uneven road toward Hassanieh. The journey from Baghdad had been long and uncomfortable, the landscape stretching endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional cluster of mud brick houses or a lone palm tree swaying in the faint breeze. Amy adjusted her hat, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow, and glanced at the driver, a taciturn man who had spoken barely a dozen words since they'd left the city. She was no stranger to travel or to the demands of her profession, but this assignment felt different. Dr. Eric Leidner, an archaeologist leading a dig near Hassanieh, had hired her to care for his wife, Louise, who was reportedly suffering from what he vaguely described as nervous terrors. The letter from Dr. Leidner had been polite but urgent, offering a generous fee and requesting her immediate departure. Amy, accustomed to tending to the sick and the anxious in hospitals and private homes across England, had accepted without hesitation the prospect of working at an archaeological dig. Far from the familiar bustle of London intrigued her. Yet, as the car bounced over another rut in the road, she couldn't shake a faint unease, a sense that this job might be more than she'd bargained for. The car slowed as they approached the dig site, a sprawling encampment nestled in a shallow valley. Tents and makeshift shelters dotted the landscape, their canvas flaps fluttering in the wind. In the distance, Amy could make out the outlines of ancient ruins, crumbling walls, and half-buried structures that spoke of a civilization long vanished. Workers moved to and fro, their figures silhouetted against the fading light, carrying tools or baskets of earth. The air carried the faint scent of dust and something sharper. Like old stone and forgotten secrets, Amy's heart quickened with a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was no ordinary hospital ward. The driver pulled up beside a large tent, its entrance flanked by crates and equipment. A man emerged, tall and lean, with a weathered face and a shock of dark hair streaked with grey, his eyes sharp and intelligent, fixed on Amy as she stepped out of the car. He wore a linen shirt, slightly rumpled, and trousers stained with the red-brown dust of the desert. "Nurse Leithern, I presume," he said, extending a hand. His voice was warm but carried a trace of fatigue, as though he bore the weight of more than just the day's work. "Yes, Dr. Leidner," Amy replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from months of handling tools and sifting through earth. "I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, his expression softening. "It's not the most comfortable place, I'm afraid, but we've done our best to make it livable. Come, let me show you to your quarters." As they walked through the camp, Dr. Leidner explained the basics of the dig. The site, known as Tellurimia, was believed to be a settlement from the ancient Mesopotamian era, possibly dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. His team had been excavating for months, uncovering pottery, seals, and fragments of cuneiform, tablets that hinted at a rich history. But his tone grew somber as he spoke of his wife. "Louise has been unwell," he said, choosing his words carefully. "She's a sensitive soul, and the isolation here, combined with the pressures of the dig, has taken a toll. I hope your presence will help steady her nerves." Amy nodded, her professional instincts kicking in. "I'll do my best, Dr. Leidner. Can you tell me more about her symptoms?" He hesitated. glancing toward the horizon as if searching for an answer in the fading light. She's been having nightmares, waking in a panic. She claims to hear things at night, strange noises, whispers. I've tried to reassure her, but he trailed off, his jaw tightening. I'm no doctor. I leave her in your capable hands. They reached a smaller tent, its interior furnished with a cot, a folding table, and a chair. A lantern hung from a pole, casting a soft glow over the sparse surroundings. Amy set her suitcase down, grateful for the simplicity. She'd stayed in worse places during her nursing career. I'll introduce you to the team at dinner, Dr. Leidner said. Rest for now. You've had a long journey. Left alone, Amy unpacked her essentials, a few changes of clothes, her medical kit, and a worn copy of Jane Eyre she carried for comfort. She stepped outside to take in the camp. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was a deep indigo, speckled with stars. The air had cooled, but the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant clink of tools and the murmur of voices. Somewhere nearby, a generator hummed, providing a faint undercurrent of sound. Dinner was served in a large communal tent, where a long table was set with mismatched plates and a spread of simple fare flatbread, lentils, roasted vegetables, and dates. The team gathered around, their faces lit by the flickering light of lanterns. Dr. Leidner introduced Amy, and she took stock of the group. Her nurses I trained to observe details. Others might miss. There was Richard Carey, a handsome Englishman, in his 30s, an architect who mapped the site's structures. His easy smile and quick wit seemed at odds with the tension in his posture, as if he were holding something back. Beside him sat Father Lavigny, a French monk and epigraphist, whose dark eyes darted about the room, taking in everything. His cassock was dusty, but his demeanor was calm, almost detached, as he spoke of ancient languages with quiet authority. Marie Mercado, a sharp-featured woman with a nervous laugh, was married to Joseph Mercado, a chemist who analyzed the sites. Finds. Joseph was short and weary, his hands stained with chemicals, and his eyes flicked constantly to his wife, who seemed to avoid his gaze. Bill Coleman, the team's photographer, was younger, with a boyish grin and a careless air that bordered on insolence. David Emmett, an American assistant archaeologist, was quiet but observant, his steady gaze suggesting a mind that missed little. Sheila Riley, the daughter of a local official, was the only other woman besides Marie and Louise, her sharp tongue and quick temper evident in her exchanges with Bill. And then there was Louise Leidner. She entered the tent last, her presence commanding attention. She was beautiful in a way that felt almost otherworldly, tall and slender, with pale blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold. Her eyes, a striking violet, held a haunted quality, as though she saw things others could not. She greeted Amy with a smile that was both warm and fragile, like a porcelain vase on the verge of cracking. "Thank you for coming, Nurse," Louise said, her voice soft but tinged with an accent Amy couldn't quite place, perhaps French, perhaps something else. "I hope you'll find this place tolerable." "I'm sure I will, Mrs. Leidner," Amy replied, noting the faint tremor in Louise's hands as she reached for a glass of water. "I'm here to help." The meal was lively but strained, the conversation punctuated by awkward silences and forced laughter. Amy sensed undercurrents of resentment and rivalry, though she couldn't yet pinpoint their source. Richard Carey spoke to Louise with a warmth that felt too familiar, earning a sharp glance from Marie Mercado. Father Lavigny watched the group with an intensity that made Amy uneasy, while Bill Coleman's jokes fell flat, met with eye rolls from Sheila. Dr. Leidner, for his part, seemed preoccupied, his eyes often drifting to his wife-daughter as the meal ended. Amy followed Louise to her tent, a spacious setup with a proper bed and a small writing desk. Louise sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm not mad, nurse," she said abruptly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Eric thinks I'm imagining things, but I'm not. I hear them at night scratching, whispering. It's as if someone is watching me." Amy knelt beside her, her voice calm and professional. "Can you describe the sounds? Or when they happen?" Louise hesitated, her gaze flickering to the tent's entrance. "It's always after midnight. a faint tapping like fingers on the canvas, and sometimes a voice too low to make out the words, "I've looked outside, but there's never anyone there." Amy nodded, making a mental note to check the tent's surroundings later. "Have you been sleeping poorly for long?" "Weeks," Louise admitted. "Ever since we found that relic, a gold amulet, ancient, priceless. Eric says it's the find of the season, but I feel it's brought something dark with it." Amy offered a reassuring smile. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks in a place like this, so far from home. I'll stay close tonight and keep an ear out. You're not alone." Louise's eyes softened with gratitude, but the fear remained. Amy left her to rest, stepping out into the cool night air. The camp was quiet now, the workers retired to their tents. The only sound the distant howl of a jackal. She walked the perimeter, her flashlight casting long shadows across the sand. The ruins loomed in the darkness, their jagged outlines like the bones of some ancient beast. As she passed Louise's tent, she paused, listening. For a moment, she thought she heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingertips brushing against canvas. She froze, her heart pounding, and scanned the darkness. Nothing. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Amy returned to her tent, her mind racing. She dismissed Louise's fears as nerves, but now she wasn't so sure. Something about this place, the isolation, the secrets buried in the earth, the tension among the team felt wrong. She lay on her cot, the lantern dimmed, and stared at the canvas ceiling. Sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, Amy rose early, determined to familiarize herself with the camp and its routines. The dig site was already buzzing with activity, workers sifting through earth under David Emmett's direction. She watched as Richard Carey sketched a newly uncovered wall, his pencil moving with precision, while Father Lavigny examined a clay tablet, muttering to himself in French. Marie Mercado hovered near her husband, her eyes darting suspiciously toward Louise, who stood apart, gazing at the ruins with a distant expression. Dr. Leidner joined Amy, offering a cup of strong, bitter coffee. "How did Louise fare last night?" he asked, his voice low. "She's frightened," Amy said honestly. She mentioned hearing noises, tapping, whispering. "I checked the tent last night and heard something myself, though I couldn't find the source." His face darkened. "The wind, perhaps. It plays tricks out here. But I'll have David check the tent for loose fittings. Thank you for keeping an eye on her." Amy nodded, but her unease grew. The wind didn't tap rhythmically or whisper in the dark. She spent the day observing the team, noting their interactions. Richard Carey's glances at Louise were too frequent, too lingering. Marie Mercado's hostility was palpable, her sharp comments cutting through the air like a knife. Joseph Mercado seemed distracted, his hands trembling as he handled his equipment. Even Bill Coleman's carefree demeanor felt forced, as if he were hiding something behind his jokes. That evening, as Amy sat with Louise in her tent, the conversation turned to the relic Louise had mentioned. "It's beautiful," Louise said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A gold amulet, inscribed with symbols no one can fully decipher. Father Lavigny says it's from a temple, maybe a priestess's treasure, but I feel watched when I'm near it." "Where is it kept?" Amy asked, her curiosity piqued. "In the storage tent, under lock and key. Eric's very particular about it, but I wish we'd never found it." Amy made a mental note to ask Dr. Leidner about the amulet. If it was as valuable as Louise claimed, it could be the source of the team's tension or worse. She stayed with Louise until she fell asleep, then stepped outside, her flashlight in hand. The camp was quiet, the stars bright overhead. She walked toward the storage tent, its entrance secured with a heavy padlock. She tested it, finding it secure, but as she turned to leave, she heard it again, the faint tapping, followed by a low, indistinct murmur. She swung her flashlight around, illuminating the sand and the nearby ruins. Nothing moved. The sound stopped, leaving only the pounding of her heart. She returned to her tent, her mind churning. Louise's fears were real. She was certain of it now. But whether they stemmed from a human source or something else, she couldn't say. The days that followed were a blur of routine and unease. Amy tended to Louise, administering mild sedatives when her nerves frayed, but the strange noises persisted. She began to notice patterns, small things easily overlooked. A shadow moving near the ruins at dusk, a crate left open when it should have been locked, whispers among the team, cut short when she approached. The relic, the amulet Louise feared, was the talk of the camp, its discovery fueling both excitement and suspicion. One afternoon, as Amy helped Louise sort through some personal items, a letter slipped from a book, a single sheet, folded tightly with no envelope. Louise's face paled as she snatched it up, but not before Amy glimpsed the words scrawled in a jagged hand, "You can't escape me. Mrs. Leidner." Amy said gently, "Who sent that?" Louise's hands trembled as she crumpled the paper. "No one. It's nothing." But Amy knew better. The letter was a threat, and Louise's fear was no longer just nerves. Something or someone was stalking her and the dig site. With its ancient secrets and buried treasures was no safe haven. Amy resolved to keep a closer watch, not just on Louise, but on everyone around her. The camp's atmosphere grew heavier. With each passing day, the workers whispered of curses, the team snapped at one another, and Louise's terrors worsened. Amy began to feel it, to a sense of being watched, of unseen eyes in the dark. The desert stretched endlessly around them, isolating them from the world, and the ruins seemed to hum with a life of their own. Whatever was happening at Tel Yerimia, Amy knew it was only the beginning. By the end of her first week, Amy had settled into a rhythm, but the unease never left her. She wrote in her journal, a habit she'd kept since her nursing days, recording her observations, Richard Carey's lingering looks, Marie Mercado's venomous glares, Father Livigny's secretive murmurs. She noted the tapping sounds, the whispers. The letter Louise hid, and always in the back of her mind, was the relic, the gold amulet that seemed to cast a shadow over everything. One night, as she lay in her tent, unable to sleep, she heard it again. The tapping, louder this time, followed by a faint, chilling laugh. She bolted upright, her flashlight in hand, and stepped outside. The camp was still, the air cold and sharp. She moved toward Louise's tent, her steps silent on the sand. The sound came again, closer now, from the direction of the ruins. Amy hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't one for superstition, but the weight of the place, the ancient stones, the buried secrets, was undeniable. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and moved forward, determined to find the source. The ruins loomed ahead, their shadows twisting in the moonlight. She stepped carefully, her eyes scanning the darkness, and then she saw it, a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing among the ruins. It was too far to make out details, but it was human, motionless, watching. Amy's heart pounded as she raised her flashlight, but before she could call out, the figure vanished, swallowed by the night. She stood there, the desert silent around her, and knew one thing for certain. Whatever was haunting Louise Leidner was no figment of her imagination. The danger was real, and it was closer than anyone realized. Chapter 2. Shadows of the past. Sun hung low over the barren expanse of Hassanieh, its dying rays casting long, jagged shadows across the archaeological dig site. Nurse Amy Letheron, her boots crunching against the dry earth, surveyed the scene with a mix of curiosity and unease. The air was thick with dust, stirred by the relentless wind that carried whispers of ancient secrets buried beneath the sands. She had arrived only yesterday, summoned by Dr. Eric Leidner to tend to his wife, Louise, whose nervous condition had reportedly worsened. Yet, as Amy stood among the scattered tents and the skeletal remains of the excavation, she sensed a tension that went beyond one woman's fragile nerves. The dig team was a motley crew, each member distinct yet bound by an unspoken strain. Dr. Leidner, a tall, scholarly man with a gentle demeanor, seemed perpetually distracted, his eyes often drifting toward his wife's tent. Louise Leidner was a vision, her delicate features framed by golden hair that caught the fading light like a halo. But her beauty was overshadowed by an almost palpable fear, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting some unseen threat. Amy, trained to observe the subtleties of human behavior, noted the way Louise's hands trembled when she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. As if guarding a secret, the others were no less intriguing. Richard Carey, the architect, was a handsome man with a reserved air, his gaze lingering on Louise a moment too long for mere professional interest. Marie Mercado, the sharp-tongued wife of the chemist Joseph Mercado, radiated hostility, her dark eyes flashing with barely concealed resentment whenever Louise was near. Joseph himself was a nervous sort, his hands always moving, fidgeting with tools or papers. Father Levigny, a French monk with a scholarly air, spent his days deciphering ancient inscriptions, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the group's growing unease. Bill Coleman, the young assistant, was the only one who seemed untouched by the atmosphere, his easy grin and casual banter a jarring note in the tense symphony. Amy's first night at the dig had been restless. The wind howled outside her tent, carrying strange noises, faint scratches, distant murmurs that kept her awake. She dismissed them as the sounds of an unfamiliar place, but the memory lingered as she joined the team for breakfast. The meal was a quiet affair, the clink of cutlery against tin plates the only sound breaking the silence. Louise barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. Dr. Leidner hovered nearby, his concern evident in the way he refilled her water glass before she could ask. After breakfast, Louise requested a private moment. With Amy, they retreated to Louise's tent, a small oasis of order amidst the chaos of the dig. The interior was sparsely furnished with a cot, a small table, and a trunk of personal belongings. A single photograph rested on the table, a younger Louise, smiling beside a man with sharp features and intense eyes. Amy assumed it was Dr. Leidner, though something about the image felt off. The man's expression too cold for the warmth she associated with Eric. Louise sat on the cot, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm glad you're here, nurse," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't been myself. Eric thinks it's nerves, but it's more than that." She hesitated, glancing at the tent flap as if expecting someone to burst in. "I've been getting letters, threatening ones." Amy's interest sharpened. Letters from whom? Louise's eyes flickered to the photograph, then back to Amy. I think they're from my first husband, Frederick Bosner." Her voice cracked on the name, and she took a shaky breath. "He was a German involved in espionage during the war. I thought he was dead. Everyone did. But these letters there, in his hand, I'm sure of it." Amy frowned, her practical mind grappling with the implications. "What do they say?" "They warn me to leave, to stay away from Eric, from the dig. They say I'll regret it if I don't." Louise's fingers twisted the edge of her shawl. "The first one came a month ago, slipped under my door in Baghdad. Another arrived last week, here at the site. I don't know how he's finding me." Amy's training kicked in, her voice calm but firm. "Have you shown these to Dr. Leidner?" Louise shook her head. "Eric would worry himself sick. He's already so protective. And the others, I don't trust them. Not all of them." Her gaze drifted to the tent flap again. "There's something wrong here, nurse. I can feel it." Amy promised to keep the conversation confidential, though her mind raced with questions. A dead husband sending letters, it sounded like a delusion born of stress. Yet Louise's fear was real enough to make Amy doubt her initial skepticism. She resolved to keep a closer eye on the teen, to watch for signs of deceit or malice. The day unfolded with the rhythm of the dig shovel scraping earth, brushes sweeping away centuries of dust, voices calling out discoveries. Amy, with no medical duties until Louise needed her, wandered the site, observing the team at work. Richard Carey was meticulous, sketching plans for a newly uncovered wall with a precision that bordered on obsession. Yet his eyes strayed to Louise whenever she passed, a flicker of longing betraying his otherwise stoic facade. Marie Mercado, on the other hand, was all sharp edges, her comments laced with venom as she criticized the pace of the work order. He tore, most pointedly, Louise's presence. "She's a distraction," Marie muttered to her husband, loud enough for Amy to overhear. Joseph, absorbed in analyzing soil samples, only nodded absently. The discovery of a rare relic that afternoon shifted the mood from tense to electric. It was a small statue, no taller than a hand, carved from a dark, shimmering stone. Father Lavigny identified it as a representation of an ancient deity. Its surface etched with symbols that spoke of rituals long forgotten. The team gathered around, their faces alight with excitement, though Amy noted the undercurrent of greed in their eyes. Dr. Leidner declared it a significant find, one that could draw international attention to the dig. Bill Coleman, ever the joker, quipped about selling it to a museum for a fortune, earning a sharp look from Marie Dot as the sun dipped below the horizon. The team retreated to their tents, but the relic's discovery lingered in their conversations. Amy joined Louise for a walk along the edge of the site, hoping to ease her patient's nerves. The desert stretched endlessly before them, its vastness both beautiful and foreboding. Louise seemed calmer, but her words carried a weight that chilled Amy. "That statue, it feels wrong," she said, her voice low, like it's watching. "U.S. Do you believe in curses, nurse?" Amy, ever practical, shook her head. "I believe in what I can see and touch, but I'll admit, there's something unsettling about this place." Louise nodded, her eyes distant. "Frederick used to say the past never stays buried. I thought he meant his work, but now, I wonder if he meant himself." That night, Amy lay awake, the strange noises returning, faint, rhythmic taps like fingers against canvas. She rose, peering out of her tent, but saw only shadows dancing in the moonlight. The dig site felt alive, its secrets stirring in the dark. She thought of Louise's letters, of Frederick Bosner's ghost haunting the present, and of the relic that seemed to draw out the worst in everyone. The team's rivalries, the unspoken desires, the hidden motives, they were all shadows of the past, converging on this isolated patch of earth. As Amy drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the dig was unearthing more than artifacts. Something darker was rising, something that would not stay buried much longer. Chapter 3. The relic's cursed sun rose over the arid expanse of the Hassanieh dig site, casting long shadows across the sand-swept ruins. Nurse Amy Leathern stood at the edge of the excavation, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, her eyes scanning the horizon where the desert met the sky in a shimmering haze. The air was thick with the scent of dust and ancient stone, and the faint hum of activity filled the camp. As the archaeological team began their day's work, Amy had been at the dig for only a few days, but the weight of the place, its isolation, its secrets already pressed upon her. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, shielding her eyes from the glare, and watched as the team moved with practiced precision, their tools glinting in the morning light. Dr. Eric Leidner, the expedition leader, stood near the central trench, his tall frame stooped as he examined a newly uncovered section of earth. His face, lined with the strain of the dig and his wife's deteriorating condition, was a mask of focus. Beside him, Richard Carey, the architect and surveyor, sketched measurements on a clipboard, his dark eyes occasionally flickering toward the main tent where Louise Leidner, the doctor's wife, rested. Amy noted the glance, a fleeting moment, of something unspoken admiration, perhaps, or something deeper. She tucked the observation away, her nurse's instinct for human behavior as sharp as ever. The dig site was a labyrinth of trenches and scaffolding, with workers sifting through layers of history under the watchful eyes of the team. Father Lavigny, the epigraphist, knelt beside a stone tablet, his fingers tracing the cuneiform script with reverence. His cassock was dusted with sand, but his demeanor remained calm, almost otherworldly, as if the ancient world spoke to him directly. Nearby, Joseph Mercado, the chemist, argued with his wife, Marie, over some trivial matter, their voices carrying a sharp edge that made Amy wince. The Mercado's marriage seemed a volatile thing, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Bill Coleman, the young assistant, lounged against a crate, his casual grin at odds with the tension around him, while David Emmett, the quiet American, worked methodically, his eyes rarely leaving the ground. Amy's thoughts were interrupted by a shout from the trench. "We've got something," called one of the local workers. His voice rising with excitement, the team converged, their tools forgotten as they gathered around the discovery. Amy, curious despite herself, stepped closer. Peering into the shallow pit where a glint of gold caught the light, Dr. Leidner knelt, brushing away the dirt with a small trowel, revealing an object that seemed to pulse with significance. A small, intricately carved statuette, no larger than a man's hand, depicting a figure with wide, unblinking eyes. Its surface gleamed, untouched by the centuries, as if it had been waiting to be found. "It's extraordinary," Leidner breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mesopotamian, likely from the Akkadian period. A votive figure, perhaps, a deity or guardian." His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it, cradling it like a newborn. The team murmured in awe, their rivalries momentarily forgotten. Even Amy, no expert in archaeology, felt the weight of the moment, the sense that they had uncovered something not just valuable, but sacred. Father Lavigny stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the statuette. "Remarkable," he said, his French accent softening the word, "but there are stories about such relics. The people of this land believed some objects carried consequences, a curse, if you will." His tone was measured, but the word hung in the air like a storm cloud. "A curse?" Bill Coleman scoffed, tossing a pebble into the trench. "Come off it, Father. It's just a bit of old gold. Worth a fortune, maybe, but no spooks here." His laugh was loud, but Amy noticed it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't dismiss the past so quickly." Lavigny replied, his gaze steady. "The ancients placed great power in their relics. Some were said to bring ruin to those who disturbed them." He turned to Leidner. "You should be cautious, Eric. This find could stir trouble, both here and beyond." Amy glanced at Leidner, expecting him to brush off the warning, but his face was pale, his eyes fixed on the statuette. "We'll catalogue it properly," he said, his voice tight. "No need for superstition. But let's keep this quiet for now. No word to the outside until we know more." The team dispersed, their excitement tempered by Lavigny's words. Amy returned to the main tent, where Louise Leidner lay on a cot, her face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. The heat was oppressive, even in the shade, and Louise's delicate frame seemed to wilt under it. Amy checked her pulse, noting its rapid flutter, and offered a glass of water, which Louise accepted with a trembling hand. "You heard about the find?" Amy asked, keeping her tone light. Louise's eyes, sharp and blue, met hers, and for a moment Amy saw a flicker of fear. "Yes," Louise said softly. "Eric told me. A statuette, isn't it? Something important." Her voice trailed off, and she glanced toward the tent flap as if expecting someone to appear. "It's quite the discovery," Amy said, adjusting the pillows behind Louise. The team's all abuzz, but Father Lavigny mentioned something about a curse. Silly talk, of course. Louise's hand tightened on the glass. "The curse?" She whispered. "No, it's not silly. Not here." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Amy, I received another letter this morning. It was slipped under the tent flap. It said, 'The relic will bring your doom.'" Amy's heart skipped a beat. She had heard about the threatening letters from Louise's past missives, supposedly from her first husband, Frederick Bosner, a man presumed dead. The idea that they were connected to the statuette seemed far-fetched, but Louise's fear was real, palpable. "Did you keep the letter?" Amy asked, her nurse's calm. Masking her unease, Louise shook her head. "I burned it. I couldn't bear to look at it. But it's him, Amy. I know it is. He's found me. And now this relic." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Amy placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. Here, Mrs. Leidner. There are people all around, and Dr. Leidner won't let anything happen to you. Nor will I." But even as she spoke, Amy felt a chill, as if the desert itself were listening. The day passed in a blur of activity, with the team cataloguing the statuette and debating its significance. Amy kept a close eye on Louise, who remained in the tent, her nerves fraying with each passing hour. By evening, the camp had settled into an uneasy quiet, the heat giving way to a cool, starlit night. Amy sat outside the tent, sipping tea and watching the shadows dance across the dunes. The dig site felt alive, almost malevolent, as if the relic had awakened something ancient and vengeful. Richard Carey approached, his silhouette tall against the firelight. "Mind if I join you, nurse?" he asked, his voice low. Amy nodded, gesturing to a nearby chair. He sat, his hands clasped tightly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've noticed the tension, haven't you?" he said after a moment. "This place, it's getting to everyone." That statuette stirred things up. Amy nodded. "It's a big find. People get possessive over treasures like that." "It's more than that," Carey said, his voice barely audible. "Louise is terrified. I saw her today, and she looked haunted. I don't believe in curses, but something's wrong here, something beyond the relic." Amy studied him, noting the concern in his eyes. She had seen the way he looked at Louise, admiration tinged with longing. "You care about her, don't you?" she said, keeping her tone neutral. Carey's jaw tightened. "She's remarkable, but she's Eric's wife. I'd never—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Forget it. Just keep an eye on her, will you? She's not well." "I will," Amy promised. But her mind was racing. Carey's feelings, Louise's letters. The relic's curse, it was all connected. Though she couldn't yet see how Dotter's night deepened, Amy retired to her tent, but sleep eluded her. The desert was never truly silent. The wind whispered through the ruins, carrying faint echoes of the past. She thought of Father Lavigny's warning, the statuette's unblinking eyes, and Louise's terror. The dig site, once a place of discovery, now felt like a stage for something darker, a tragedy waiting to unfold. The next morning, Amy woke to the sound of raised voices. She hurried to the central trench where the team was gathered, their faces pale. Dr. Leidner stood at the center, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Another letter," he said, his voice shaking. "It was left on my desk. It says the relic must be returned to the earth, or we'll all pay the price." Amy's stomach churned. The curse, it seemed, was no longer just a story. It was a threat written in ink and malice, and it was closing in on them all. Chapter 4. A cry in the night sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the archaeological dig site near Hassanieh cloaked in a heavy darkness that seemed to swallow sound and light alike. The air was thick with the scent of dust and ancient earth, stirred up by the day's excavations. Nurse Amy Letheran sat in her small, canvas-walled tent, her notebook open on the rickety wooden table before her. The faint glow of an oil lamp cast flickering shadows across the pages, where she scribbled her observations of the day. Her role as a nurse had brought her to this remote corner of Iraq, hired by Dr. Eric Leidner to care for his wife, Louise, whose nervous condition had worsened in recent days. But tonight, Amy's thoughts were not on medicine alone. The dig site, with its eclectic mix of scholars, laborers, and adventurers, felt like a simmering pot ready to boil over. Louise Leidner's terrors had taken a darker turn. Earlier that evening, as Amy helped her prepare for bed, Louise's hands trembled, her eyes darting to the window of her room, as if expecting some phantom to materialize. "It's there again," she had whispered, her voice barely audible, her delicate features drawn tight with fear. A face, watching me. Amy had checked the window, its heavy wooden shutters bar tight, and found nothing but the endless expanse of desert beyond. She'd reassured Louise, attributing her visions to exhaustion or the strain of the dig, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Louise's fear was palpable, infectious, and Amy couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Now, alone in her tent, Amy tried to focus on her notes. She wrote of the dig team's dynamics, her pen scratching against the paper. Dr. Leidner's devotion to his wife was undeniable, yet there was a strain in his eyes, a tightness that suggested more than mere concern. Richard Carey, the handsome young archaeologist, seemed unable to tear his gaze from Louise, his admiration bordering on obsession. Marie Mercado, with her sharp tongue and sharper glares, made no secret of her dislike for Louise. Her jealousy as evident as the dust on her boots. Father Lavigny, the quiet scholar of ancient languages, kept to himself, his eyes often fixed on the relics unearthed that day, particularly the one rumored to carry a curse. Joseph Mercado, Marie's husband, was a bundle of nerves, his hands fidgeting whenever Louise was near. And then there was Bill Coleman, the carefree assistant, whose casual jokes did little to mask the tension that hung over the camp like a storm cloud. Amy paused, her pen hovering above the page. The night was unnaturally quiet. The usual sounds of the desert distant jackals, the rustle of wind through sparse vegetation absent. It was as if the world held its breath. She glanced at her watch, just past midnight. The dig site felt more isolated than ever. Its cluster of tents and makeshift buildings a fragile outpost in the vast emptiness of Mesopotamia. She set her pen down, rubbing her tired eyes, when a sound pierced the silence, a faint, high-pitched cry, sharp and fleeting, like the wail of a wounded animal. Amy froze, her heart thudding in her chest. The cry had come from the direction of the main camp. Near Louise's quarters, she grabbed her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders, and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, the stars above bright but distant, offering little comfort. Her boots crunched softly on the sandy ground as she moved toward Louise's room, her lamp held high. The cry did not come again, but the silence that followed was heavier, more oppressive. She reached Louise's door, a sturdy wooden panel set into the mud brick wall of the expedition house. She knocked softly, calling out, "Mrs. Leidner, are you all right?" No answer. Amy hesitated, then pushed the door open, the hinges creaking faintly. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight slipping through a crack in the shutters. Louise lay on her bed, her form still beneath the thin blanket. Amy approached, her lamp casting a warm glow over the room. Louise's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. She appeared to be asleep, though her face was pale, her brow furrowed even in rest. Amy scanned the room, noting the barred window, the simple furnishings, a chair, a small table, a trunk of clothes. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the air felt charged, as if the room itself held a secret. She stepped closer to the window, checking the shutters. They were secure, the iron bar firmly in place. No face could have peered through. No intruder could have entered. Yet Louise's fear had been so vivid, so real. Amy shivered. Though the night was not cold, she turned back to Louise, considering whether to wake her, but decided against it. The woman needed rest, not more questions. Amy left the room, closing the door softly behind her, and made her way back to her tent, the cry still echoing in her mind. The next morning, the camp was abuzz with the day's work. The relic unearthed. Days earlier, a golden amulet inscribed with cuneiform, said to be tied to an ancient Mesopotamian curse, had drawn the team's focus. Dr. Leidner supervised the careful cleaning and cataloguing, his voice calm but firm as he directed the workers. Father Lavigny hovered nearby, his fingers tracing the amulet's edges, as he muttered about its inscriptions. A warning, he said, to no one in particular, his French accent thick. This speaks of vengeance, of a guardian spirit bound to the relic. His words sent a ripple of unease through the team, though Bill Coleman laughed it off, calling it a load of old tosh. Amy watched from a distance, her attention split between the relic and the team's interactions. Joseph Mercado was unusually jumpy, dropping a brush and cursing under his breath. Marie shot him a withering look, her lips pursed. Richard Carey stood apart, his eyes drifting toward Louise, who sat in the shade of a canopy, her face pale and drawn. Amy approached her, offering a glass of water. "Did you sleep at all, Mrs. Leidner?" she asked gently. Louise shook her head, her fingers twisting the hem of a dress. "Not much. I kept thinking I heard something, a cry, perhaps." "Did you hear it, nurse?" Amy nodded, her unease returning. "I did. I checked on you, but you were asleep. I found nothing out of the ordinary." Louise's eyes widened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's him. I know it. He's out there, watching me." She spoke of her first husband, Frederick Bosner, the German spy she believed dead but feared alive, his threatening letters haunting her. Amy listened, her practical nature warring with the growing sense that something was deeply wrong at the dig. The day wore on, the heat rising with the sun. The team's tensions simmered beneath the surface, erupting in small waves. A sharp word from Marie, A curt reply from Dr. Leidner, a nervous laugh from Bill. Amy kept her eyes open, noting every glance, every gesture. Joseph Mercado's erratic behavior stood out most. He seemed unable to focus, his hands shaking as he handled tools, his eyes darting toward the horizon as if expecting someone or something to appear. That evening, as the team gathered for a sparse dinner of flatbread and stew, the atmosphere was strained. Father Lavigne spoke little, his attention fixed on a notebook filled with sketches of the amulet. Richard Carey sat near. Louise, his concern evident but restrained. Dr. Leidner watched his wife with a protective intensity that bordered on possessiveness. Amy, seated at the edge of the group, felt like an outsider, her role as nurse giving her a unique perspective on the team's fraying nerves. After dinner, she walked with Louise back to her room, the night closing in around them. The dessert was silent again, the stars sharp against the black sky. Louise paused at her door, her hand on the latch. "Nurse," she said softly, "stay close tonight. I don't know why, but I feel something terrible is coming." Amy nodded, her throat tight. "I'll be nearby, Mrs. Leidner. Try to rest." But rest was elusive for Amy as well. She returned to her tent, her notebook open once more, and wrote of the day's events. The cry in the night, Louise's fear, and the team's growing unease. The relic, with its whispered curse, loomed large in her thoughts. Was it truly cursed? Or was it a catalyst for human greed and fear? She couldn't say. But the dig site felt like a stage set for tragedy, its isolation amplifying every suspicion, every shadow. As the hours ticked by, Amy lay awake, listening to the night. The cry did not come again. But the silence was no comfort. It was as if the desert itself was watching, waiting for the inevitable. She thought of Louise, alone in her room, and of the team, each member carrying their own secrets, their own motives. The relic, the letters, the cry in the night, they were pieces of a puzzle. But the picture they formed remained elusive. The next day brought no relief. The team worked under a blazing sun, the relic now stored in a locked case in Dr. Leidner's office. Father Lavigny's warnings about its curse were met with skepticism by some, fear by others. Joseph Mercado's behavior grew stranger, his eyes bloodshot, his movements jerky. Amy caught him staring at Louise during a break, his expression unreadable. She made a note to watch him closely, her instincts telling her he was a weak link in the chain of this troubled expedition. Louise, meanwhile, grew more withdrawn. She spoke little, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for the source of her fear. Amy stayed near, offering what comfort she could. But the weight of the unknown pressed on them both. The cry in the night had been real. Amy was certain, but its source remained a mystery. Was it Louise's imagination, fueled by her fears of a vengeful husband, or was it something or someone closer, hidden among the team? The dig site's isolation, once a mere inconvenience, now felt like a trap. The nearest village was miles away, the roads rough and rarely traveled. The team was cut off, reliant on each other yet divided by suspicion. Amy's role as an observer gave her clarity, but also a growing sense of dread. She thought of the relic, its golden surface gleaming with promise and peril. She thought of the cry, faint but piercing, and of Louise's haunted eyes. And she wondered, as the sun sank once more, what the next night would bring. The days that followed were a blur of routine and tension. The team continued their work, unearthing fragments of pottery and stone, but the relic remained the center of attention. Its curse, whether real or imagined, cast a long shadow. Amy's nights were restless, her sleep broken by the memory of that cry. She checked on Louise each evening, finding her increasingly fragile, her beauty marred by fear. The team's dynamics shifted subtly. Marie's hostility sharpened, Richard's longing grew more overt, and Joseph's unease bordered on paranoia. One night, as Amy sat in her tent, the cry came again. Sharper this time, more desperate, it cut through the silence like a blade. She was on her feet in an instant, lamp in hand, her heart pounding. She ran to Louise's room, calling her name, but the door was locked. She pounded on it, her voice rising with urgency. "Mrs. Leidner, open the door. No response. The camp stirred, voices calling out in the darkness. Dr. Leidner appeared, his face pale, a key in his hand. He unlocked the door, and they rushed. Inside, Louise lay on her bed, her eyes wide with terror, but she was alive, her breath coming in short gasps. "I saw him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "At the window." His face. Amy checked the shutters, finding them secure as before. Dr. Leidner knelt beside his wife, his hands gentle but shaking. "There's no one, Louise," he said, his voice strained. "You're safe." But Amy wasn't so sure. The cry, the locked door, the barred window, it all pointed to something she couldn't yet grasp. She stayed with Louise until she conned, then returned to her tent, her mind racing. The dig site was no longer just a place of work. It was a battleground of fear and secrets, and Amy felt herself drawn deeper into its web. The relic, the letters, the cry, they were threads in a tapestry of danger, and Amy knew she had to untangle them before it was too late. She wrote in, her notebook, her pen moving faster now, capturing every detail, every suspicion. The team was fracturing, the desert closing in, and the sense of impending disaster was stronger than ever. Louise's fear was no longer just her own. It was the camp's and Amy's, too. The cry in the night had been a warning, and she feared the worst was yet to come. Chapter 5. Murder in the locked room. The sun hung low over the arid expanse of the Hassanieh dig site, casting long shadows that stretched like accusatory fingers across the dusty tents and scattered to facts. Nurse Amy Letheran, her uniform, slightly crumpled from the heat, stood at the edge of the central courtyard, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the archaeological team. The morning had begun with a deceptive calm, the usual hum of activity shovels clinking against earth, the murmur of scholarly debates filling the air. But now, as the clock ticked toward noon, an eerie stillness had settled over the camp, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the canvas flaps of the tents. Amy adjusted her cap, her thoughts drifting to Louise Leidner, the enigmatic woman she'd been hired to care for. Louise's nervous terrors had worsened over the past few days, her pale face haunted by something more than the desert's oppressive heat. Last night's faint cry, which Amy had dismissed as a trick of the wind, now lingered in her mind like an unwelcome guest. She shook her head, trying to focus on the present, but the unease clung to her, as persistent as the sand that worked its way into every crevice of her clothing. She was about to head toward the medical tent when a piercing scream shattered the silence. It came from the direction of Louise's quarters, a small, mud-brick building set apart from the main camp. Amy's heart lurched and she broke into a run, her boots kicking up clouds of dust. Others converged on the scene. Dr. Eric Leidner, his face pale with panic, Richard Carey, the handsome assistant archaeologist, his jaw tight, and Marie Mercado, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear but could have been something else entirely. Amy reached the door first, shoving it open. The room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn against the midday sun. Louise lay sprawled on the floor, her golden hair fanned out like a halo, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A thin trickle of blood ran from a wound at her temple, pooling on the rug beneath her. Amy knelt beside her, her training kicking in despite the shock. She pressed her fingers to Louise's wrist, searching for a pulse, but found none. The woman's skin was already cooling. The life drained from her as swiftly as water from a cracked jug. "She's dead," Amy whispered, her voice barely audible. "Doctor." Leidner stumbled forward, dropping to his knees beside his wife. "Louise, no, it can't be." His voice cracked, raw with grief, and he clutched her hand as if he could will her back to life. Amy watched him closely, noting the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an explanation. Richard Carey stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. How did this happen?" he muttered, his voice low and strained. Marie Mercado lingered behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze flickering between Louise's body and the other faces in the room. Amy couldn't shake the feeling that Marie's expression held a trace of satisfaction, quickly masked by a forced sob. The rest of the team began to gather. Joseph Mercado, his shirt stained with sweat and dirt, his eyes wild, Bill Coleman. The young surveyor, looking uncharacteristically subdued, Father Lavigne. His calm demeanour at odds with the chaos, and David Emmett, the quiet assistant, whose steady gaze seemed to take in every detail. Sheila Riley, the team's typist, hovered at the edge of the group, her face pale but composed. Amy stood, brushing her hands on her skirt, and took charge. "Someone fetch Captain Maitland from Hassanieh," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "This is a crime scene now. Nobody touches anything." Bill Coleman nodded and sprinted toward the camp's only vehicle, a dusty jeep parked near the supply tent. The others stood in a loose semicircle, their eyes darting between Louise's body and the room's sparse furnishings, a narrow bed, a wooden table, a single chair, and a heavy rug now stained with blood. The window, barred with iron, was shut tight, the latch undisturbed. The door, which Amy had pushed open, was the only entrance, and it had been locked from the inside when she arrived, a key still dangling in the lock. Captain Maitland, a weary British officer stationed in Hassanieh, arrived within the hour, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. He was a man of few words, his clipped accent cutting through the tension like a knife. "Right," he said, adjusting his cap. "Let's have a look. Nurse, you found her." Amy nodded, recounting the scream, her rush to the room, and the discovery of Louise's body. Maitland knelt beside the corpse, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the evidence. "Single blow to the head," he muttered, examining the wound. "No sign of a struggle. No weapon in sight." He stood, his eyes scanning the room. Locked door, barred window. No other way in or out. This is a proper puzzle, isn't it? Amy's mind raced. She'd seen her share of injuries in her nursing career, but this was different. The precision of the blow, the absence of any weapon, the locked room, it all felt staged. Deliberate? She glanced at Dr. Leidner, who was now sitting on the bed, his head in his hands. His grief seemed genuine, but Amy couldn't shake the memory of Louise's fear, her whispered confessions about threatening letters, and a past she couldn't escape. Maitland began questioning the teen, his notebook open, his pencil scratching. Furiously, "Who saw Mrs. Leidner last?" he asked. "I did," Amy said. "This morning, around 9. She seemed agitated, but she wouldn't say why. I gave her a mild sedative and left her to rest." Dr. Leidner looked up, his eyes red. "She was fine when I checked on her at 10. We talked about the dig, the new relic. She seemed distracted, but not unwell." Maitland's gaze narrowed. "And you locked the door when you left?" Leidner nodded. "Always. She insisted on it, ever since those letters started arriving." The mention of the letters sent a murmur through the group. Amy had heard Louise speak of them, threatening notes, written in a jagged hand, warning her of danger. Louise had believed they were from her first husband, Frederick Bosner, a man she thought was dead. Amy hadn't known whether to believe. But now, with Louise's lifeless body before them, the letters took on a chilling weight. Maitland moved to the window, testing the bars. They were solid, rusted in place, with no sign of tampering. He examined the door, the lock, the key. No forced entry. He said, almost to himself, whoever did this was either let in by Mrs. Leidner or found another way. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Marie Mercado's voice broke the silence, sharp and accusing. "It's that relic," she said, her eyes flashing. "Ever since we found it, things have gone wrong. It's cursed, I tell you." Father Lavigne, standing near the back, shook his head. "Superstition, Mrs. Mercado. The relic is a piece of history, not a harbinger of doom." Amy watched the exchange, her mind cataloguing every word, every gesture. Marie's outburst felt rehearsed, a deflection. Father Lavigne's calm was almost perfect, as if he were hiding something beneath his priestly veneer. And then there was Joseph Mercado, pacing nervously, his hands twitching as if he wanted to bolt. Maitland turned to the group. "I'll need statements from all of you. Where you were, what you saw, what you heard. No one leaves the camp until we've got this sorted." As the team dispersed, Amy lingered. her eyes drawn back to Louise's body. The single spot of blood on the rug seemed to mock her, a silent challenge to unravel the impossible. How could someone have entered a locked room, struck Louise dead, and vanished without a trace? The answer, she felt, lay in the shadows of the dig site. In the secrets the team carried like burdens, the afternoon dragged on, heavy with heat and suspicion. Maitland set up a makeshift office in the dining tent, interviewing each team member, one by one. Amy sat outside, her notebook open, jotting down her observations. She'd always been good at reading people, a skill honed through years of nursing. Now, she used it to dissect the team's behavior, searching for clues. Dr. Leidner was the first to be interviewed. He emerged looking shaken, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. Amy overheard him muttering to himself something about not knowing and how could this happen. His grief seemed real, but Amy couldn't forget Louise's fear of him. The way she'd flinched when he touched her arm the day before. Richard Carey was next. His interview brief but tense. Amy caught snippets of his conversation with Maitland, something about being in the pottery shed all morning, cataloguing finds. His alibi was solid, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of guilt when Louise's name was mentioned. Amy wondered if his feelings for Louise, so obvious to everyone, had driven him to something desperate. Marie Mercado's interview was louder, her voice carrying through the thin canvas walls. She spoke of Louise's airs, her manipulative ways, her accusations laced with venom. Amy noted the bitterness, the way Marie's hands clenched when she spoke of Louise's beauty. Jealousy, Amy thought, was a powerful motive. Joseph Mercado, Marie's husband, was a nervous wreck, stumbling over his words as Maitland pressed him. He claimed to have been at the dig site, measuring a trench, but his story shifted slightly each time he told it. Amy made a mental note to watch him closely. Bill Coleman, the young surveyor, was his usual flippant self, cracking jokes even as? Maitland grilled him. "I was out by the ziggurat, mate," he said, his Australian accent thick. Didn't hear a thing till the scream. His casual demeanor grated on Amy, but she couldn't decide if it was a mask or genuine indifference. David Emmett, the quiet assistant, was the last to be questioned. His answers were concise. His alibi straightforward. He'd been with Bill at the ziggurat, sketching plans for the next phase of the dig. Maitland seemed satisfied, but Amy noticed David's eyes lingering on the others, as if he were piecing together his own puzzle dot by evening. The camp was a cauldron of tension. The team ate dinner in silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound. Amy sat apart, her notebook hidden in her lap, her mind racing. The locked room, the missing weapon, the single spot of blood, it all pointed to a killer who knew the camp intimately. Someone who could move unseen, strike with precision, and vanish into the desert air. She thought of Louise's letters, the threats from a past she couldn't escape. Frederick Bosner, her first husband, loomed large in Amy's mind. Louise had been certain he was dead, killed in a wartime betrayal. But what if she was wrong? What if he'd tracked her to this remote dig, driven by revenge or obsession? The idea sent a chill down Amy's spine, but it didn't explain the locked room or the missing weapon. As night fell, the camp grew quieter, the stars overhead a stark contrast to the darkness below. Amy walked the perimeter, her flashlight casting thin beams across the sand. She paused outside Louise's room, now cordoned off with rope. The door was still locked, the key confiscated by Maitland. She shone her light on the window, the bars glinting like teeth. No way in, no way out. And yet, someone had done the impossible. She returned to her tent, her mind buzzing with questions. The relic, unearthed just days ago, seemed to hover over. The tragedy like a spectre. Its rumored curse, dismissed by most as superstition, now felt all too real. Father Levigny's warning echoed in her ears. Some artifacts carry a weight beyond their value. Was the relic the key, or a distraction? Amy sat on her cot, her notebook open, and began to write. She listed the team members, their alibis, their motives. Dr. Leidner's grief, Richard's longing, Marie's jealousy, Joseph's nerves, Bill's indifference, Father Levigny's secrecy. David's watchfulness. Each was a piece of the puzzle. but none fit perfectly. She thought of the blood-stained rug, the single drop that seemed to mock her. Blood didn't lie, but it could deceive. She closed her eyes, picturing the room, the rug, the bed, the table, the chair. Something nagged at her, a detail she'd overlooked. She replayed the moment she'd found Louise, the scream still ringing in her ears. The room had felt wrong, staged as if the killer wanted them to see the impossible. But what was she missing? The answer came in a flash, so sudden she nearly dropped her pencil. The rug. It wasn't just the blood, it was the placement. The rug had been slightly askew. One corner turned up as if someone had tripped over it. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it struck her as deliberate. Had the killer moved it to cover something, a mark, a clue, a trapdoor? She stood, her heart pounding. She needed to see the room again, but Maitland had sealed it. She'd have to wait until morning when she could request access. For now, she wrote down her theory, her hand shaking with excitement. The rug, the blood, the locked room, they were all part of a carefully crafted illusion, and Amy was determined to see through it. The next morning, Maitland agreed to let Amy accompany him to the crime scene. The room was as she'd left it, Louise's body now covered with a sheet, awaiting transport to Hassanieh for an autopsy. Amy knelt by the rug, her fingers tracing the edges. She lifted the corner, her breath catching as she saw it, a faint scratch on the floor, barely visible, like the mark of something heavy being dragged. Maitland, look at this, she said, pointing. He crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing. Could be nothing, he said, but his tone betrayed his interest. Or it could be something. Amy's mind raced. The scratch suggested movement. Perhaps a piece of furniture shifted to conceal a method of entry. She examined the room again, her eyes lingering on the ceiling, the walls, the floor. The ceiling was solid, no trapdoors or vents. The walls were mud brick, unyielding. But the floor. She tapped her foot, listening for a hollow sound, but found none. Maitland watched her, his expression unreadable. "You've got a sharp eye, nurse," he said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the killer wanted us to believe this was impossible," Amy said. "The locked door, the barred window, it's all too perfect. They're hiding something. In plain sight." Maitland nodded, jotting a note. "We'll keep looking. For now, I need to finish the interviews. Stay sharp, nurse. You're closer to this than you think." As Maitland left, Amy lingered, her eyes fixed on the rug. The scratch was a clue. She was sure of it, but it wasn't enough. She needed more evidence, more insight, more time. The dig site felt like a pressure cooker, the team's secrets simmering just below the surface. Someone here knew the truth, and Amy was determined to find them. The day passed in a blur of interviews and whispers. The team avoided each other's eyes, their conversations stilted. Amy watched them closely, her notebook filling with observations. Marie Mercado's sharp glances at her husband, Joseph's twitchy movements. Richard Carey's haunted expression, each was a thread in the tapestry of the crime. By evening, Maitland called a meeting in the dining tent. The team sat in a tense circle, their faces lit by the flickering light of a single lantern. "We've got no weapon, no clear entry point, and no witnesses," Maitland said, his voice heavy. "But we've got motives. Too many, if you ask me. Someone here knows more than they're saying." The accusation hung in the air, met with silence. Amy's eyes flicked to Dr. Leidner, who stared at the ground, his hands clenched. She thought of Louise's letters, the shadow of Frederick Bosner. Was he the key, or a ghost conjured to mislead them? And what of the relic? Its absence now a glaring question mark. Had it been stolen, or was it still hidden somewhere in the camp? As the meeting ended, Amy slipped away, her flashlight in hand. She returned to Louise's room, unable to shake the feeling that the answer lay there. She stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning every inch. The rug, the scratch, the blood, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. She closed her eyes, letting her mind wander. She pictured Louise, alive and afraid, locking herself in this room to escape a threat she couldn't name. She pictured the killer, silent and cunning, slipping through an impossible barrier. The answer was here. She knew it, hidden in the details she'd yet to uncover. The night was quiet, the camp asleep, but Amy's mind was alive with questions. She returned to her tent, her notebook open, her pencil moving. She wrote until her hand ached, detailing every observation, every suspicion. The truth was close, she could feel it, but it was buried deep, like the relics the team had spent months unearthing as she drifted to sleep. The image of Louise's lifeless face lingered, a silent plea for justice. Amy vowed to find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The locked room, the missing weapon, the single spot of blood, they were challenges, but Amy Letheron was no stranger to challenges. She would unravel this mystery, piece by piece, until the killer's face was revealed. Chapter 6. Poirot's arrival. Sun hung low over the arid expanse of Hassanieh, casting long shadows across the archaeological dig site. Dust swirled in the faint breeze, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. Nurse Amy Letheron stood at the edge of the camp, her sturdy boots planted firmly on the cracked earth, her eyes scanning the horizon. The news of Louise Leidner's murder had spread like wildfire through the small, insular group, and the weight of it pressed heavily on everyone. The once bustling dig site now felt like a graveyard, its silence broken only by the occasional clink of tools or the murmur of anxious voices. Amy adjusted her hat, shielding her eyes from the glare. She had seen death before. Hospitals were no strangers to it, but this was different. The locked room, the single spot of blood, the barred window, it was all so impossibly neat, like a puzzle designed to taunt. She had spent the morning with Captain Maitland, the local police officer, who had arrived promptly after the discovery of Louise's body. His investigation, however, had yielded little. No weapon, no signs of forced entry, no clear motive beyond the whispers of jealousy and rivalry that floated among the team. Maitland was a competent man, but his methods were blunt, and the complexity of the crime seemed to elude him. As Amy turned back toward the main tent, a faint hum caught her attention, a motor, distant but growing louder. She squinted, spotting a cloud of dust rising from the road that snaked through the desert. A car, old but sturdy, was approaching, its tires kicking up sand as it navigated the uneven terrain. The dig team, scattered across the site, paused their work, their heads turning toward the newcomer. Whispers rippled through the group. Amy's heart quickened. She had heard from Dr. Giles Riley, a local physician and friend of the Leidners, that a detective might be summoned. Could this be him? The car rolled to a stop near the camp's perimeter, and a figure stepped out, brushing dust from his immaculate suit. He was a small man, no taller than Amy herself, with a fastidious air that seemed utterly out of place in the rugged desert. His black patent leather shoes gleamed despite the dust, and his mustache, perfectly waxed, curled at the ends, gave him an almost comical appearance, like a character from a stage play. Yet his eyes, sharp and piercing, betrayed a mind that missed nothing. Amy knew at once who he was: Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, whose reputation for unraveling the impossible had reached even this remote corner of Iraq. Dr. Riley emerged from the main tent, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He strode toward Poirot, extending a hand. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming on such short notice. I trust your journey from Syria was not too taxing." Poirot inclined his head, his movements precise. "The journey, it was tolerable, though the roads of this country, they lack the refinement of civilization. But no matter. You have summoned Hercule Poirot, and I am here to bring order to this chaos. Tell me, what is this crime that disturbs the peace of your desert?" Riley gestured toward the tent, where the dig team had begun to gather, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "It's a bad business, Monsieur Poirot. Mrs. Louise Leidner, the wife of Dr. Eric Leidner, was found dead in her room yesterday. Killed by a blow to the head, it seems, but the circumstances, they're peculiar, to say the least." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Peculiar, you say?" This is a word that intrigues Poirot. "Come, let us walk, and you will tell me all." As Riley led Poirot toward the tent, Amy followed at a discreet distance, her nurse's instincts urging her to observe. The team had assembled inside, their usual chatter replaced by a tense silence. Dr. Eric Leidner sat at the head of the table, his face haggard, his hands clasped tightly together. Richard Carey, the architect, leaned against a post, his handsome features clouded with grief. Marie Mercado, her lips pursed, darted glances at her husband, Joseph, whose nervous fidgeting was impossible to ignore. Bill Coleman, the young assistant, tried to maintain his usual breezy demeanor, but his jokes fell flat. Father Livigny, the epigraphist, sat apart, his expression unreadable, while David Emmett, the quiet surveyor, watched the proceedings with a steady gaze, and Johnson, the chemist, hovered near the back, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Riley introduced Poirot, his voice carrying a note of authority. "This is Hercule Poirot, a detective of some renown. He's agreed to assist US in unraveling the tragedy that has struck our camp. I trust you'll all cooperate fully." A murmur ran through the group, some nodding, others exchanging wary glances. Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Ms. Amos," he began, his voice clear and accented. "A crime has been committed, and it is the task of Hercule Poirot to uncover the truth. I will require your patience and your honesty. No detail is too small, no impression too trivial. The little grey cells, they will work, but they must be fed with facts." Amy watched as Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. As if reading their thoughts, she felt a shiver, not from the desert heat, but from the intensity of his scrutiny. This was no ordinary man. He seemed to see through the masks people wore. First, Poirot continued, "I must see the place where this tragedy occurred. Dr. Leidner, you will show me the room of Madame Leidner, s'il vous plaît." Leidner rose, his movements slow, as if the weight of his grief anchored him to the chair. "Of course," he said hoarsely, "this way." The group moved toward the residential quarters, a series of low, mud-brick buildings ranged around a central courtyard. Louise's room was at the far end, its door sealed with a makeshift lock since the discovery of her body. Maitland had left a guard, a local man who stood rigidly by the entrance, but he stepped aside at Poirot's approach. Inside, the room was Spartan with a narrow bed, a wooden table, and a single chair. A woven rug lay on the floor, its center stained with a small, dark patch Louise's blood. The window, barred with iron, overlooked the desert, its latch firmly in place. Amy watched as Poirot moved methodically, his gloved hands tracing the edges of the window frame, the door, the walls. He knelt by the rug, examining the stain with a magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. "Curio," he murmured, almost to himself. "A single blow, you say, and yet so little blood. The weapon, it was not found." Maitland, who had joined them, shook his head. "Nothing. We searched the room, the courtyard, even the dig site. It's as if the killer vanished with it." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Amy suspected of his mind at work. "Vanished, you say?" "Non, non. Captain, no one vanishes. The truth, it is here, hidden in the details. Tell me, Nurse Leathern, you were close to Madame Leidner. What was her state of mind before this tragedy?" Amy started, unprepared for the question. She was frightened, she admitted. She'd been receiving threatening letters, or so she said. She thought they might be from her first husband, a man named Frederick Bosner. She believed he was dead, but the letters made her doubt it. And there were other things, odd noises at night, a face at her window. She was on edge, always looking over her shoulder. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And you, nurse, what is your impression of this team? They are not, I think, a harmonious group." Amy hesitated, aware of the eyes on her. "They're different. Dr. Leidner was devoted to Louise, almost to a fault. Mr. Carey, he seemed to admire her, maybe too much. Mrs. Mercado didn't like her. That was clear. Mr. Mercado's a bundle of nerves, and Mr. Coleman tries to act like nothing bothers him, but I think it does. Father Livigny keeps to himself, and Mr. Emmett, he's quiet, but he watches everything. Miss Johnson, she's steady, but she's been upset since Louise's death." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "You are observant, Nurse Letheran. This is good. The human heart, it reveals much, even when the lips are silent. Now, let us speak with the others." The interviews began in the main tent, Poirot questioning each team member in turn. Amy sat nearby, taking mental notes. Dr. Leidner spoke of his love for Louise, his voice breaking as he described finding her body. Richard Carey admitted to admiring Louise, but insisted his feelings were innocent. Marie Mercado's answers were sharp, her dislike for Louise barely concealed. Joseph Mercado stammered through his account, claiming he'd been at the dig site during the murder. Bill Coleman's casual demeanor faltered under Poirot's probing, and Father Livigny's responses were curt, his knowledge of the relics. History vague. David Emmett spoke calmly, his alibi corroborated by another worker, but Poirot seemed particularly interested in his precise recollection of the day's events. And Johnson, tearful, said little, her grief palpable dot as the day wore on. The heat became oppressive and Amy felt the strain of the investigation. Poirot, however, seemed tireless, his questions relentless yet polite. He returned to the crime, seen multiple times, examining the rug, the window, even the ceiling, as if searching for something no one else could see. At dusk, Poirot gathered the team once more. "Zamis," he said, "this crime, it is not simple. The locked room, the missing weapon, the threatening letters, these are pieces of a puzzle. But fear not, for Hercule Poirot will assemble them. I ask only that you remain vigilant and truthful. The killer, he is among us, and he will not escape." The team dispersed, their faces etched with unease. Amy lingered, watching Poirot as he stood by the tent's entrance, gazing out at the darkening desert. "What do you think, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked quietly. "Is it really one of them?" Poirot turned, his eyes twinkling in the fading light. "Nurse Letheran, the truth, it is like the relics you uncover here. It lies buried, but it cannot stay hidden forever. The little grey cells, they are already at work. Tomorrow, we dig deeper." As Amy retired to her quarters, the weight of Poirot's words settled over her. The dig site, once a place of discovery, now felt like a trap, its secrets guarded by a killer. She lay awake, the desert's silence broken only by the distant howl of a jackal, wondering what Poirot's little grey cells would unearth next. Chapter 7. Digging into motif as the sun hung low over the arid expanse of the Hassanieh dig site, casting long shadows across the tents and the scattered ruins that dotted the landscape. Nurse Amy Letheran sat on a canvas chair outside her tent, her notebook resting on her lap, her pen poised but idle. The air was thick with the weight of Louise Leidner's murder, and the arrival of Hercule Poirot had stirred the camp, like a gust of wind through a stagnant desert. Amy's sharp eyes, trained by years of observing patients, darted from one figure to another, cataloguing the subtle shifts in behavior among the dig team. The once cohesive group now seemed fractured, each member retreating into their own thoughts, their own secrets. Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the heat, moved with a quiet purpose that belied his small stature. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the camp, his keen gaze missing nothing. Amy had seen men like him before, men who could unravel a person with a single glance, but none quite like Poirot. His presence was both reassuring and unsettling, as if he carried the promise of truth but also the threat of exposure. She had agreed to assist him, not just as a nurse but as an observer, her practical mind and steady hand proving useful in this chaotic environment. The morning after his arrival, Poirot gathered the dig team in the communal tent, a large, open space filled with mismatched chairs and a long table cluttered with maps, tools, and half-empty coffee cups. The team assembled reluctantly, their faces a mix of curiosity, fear, and defiance. Dr. Eric Leidner sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes hollow with grief. Richard Carey, the architect, leaned against a tent pole, his jaw set and his gaze fixed on the floor. Marie Mercado, her lips pursed, fidgeted with a scarf, while her husband, Joseph, paced near the entrance, his nervous energy palpable. Father Livigny, the epigraphist, sat calmly, his hands folded over a notebook. though Amy noticed his fingers tighten whenever Poirot's eyes lingered on him. Bill Coleman, the young assistant, sprawled in his chair, attempting nonchalance but betraying his unease with a restless foot. David Emmett, the quiet surveyor, stood near the back, his expression unreadable. And Johnson, the chemist, sat beside him, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Captain Maitland, the local police officer, lingered near the entrance, his notebook open but his attention fixed on Poirot. Poirot began, his voice clear and precise, cutting through the murmurs. "Miss Amis, we are gathered here to uncover the truth behind the tragic death of Madame Louise Leidner, a woman of beauty, of charm, but also, it seems, a woman who inspired great passion and perhaps great hatred. I will speak with each of you, and I ask for your honesty. The truth, it is like the artifacts you seek, buried, but not beyond reach." Amy watched as the team exchanged glances, some fleeting, some lingering. Poirot's words had stirred the air, and she could feel the undercurrent of tension. She opened her notebook, ready to jot down anything that might aid Poirot's investigation. Her role, as he had explained, was to observe not just what was said, but what was left unsaid, the gestures, the hesitations, the unspoken alliances. Poirot turned first to Dr. Leidner. "Monsieur, you were closest to Madame Leidner. Tell me, what was her state of mind in the days before her death?" Dr. Leidner's voice was low, strained. She was frightened. She had been receiving letters, threatening ones. She thought they were from her first husband, Frederick Bosner, a man she believed dead. I tried to protect her, to calm her fears, but... His voice broke and he looked away, his hands trembling. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "These letters, they mentioned a past, oui, and what of this Frederick Bosner? Tell me more." Leidner hesitated, then spoke. "Louise told me he was a German spy during the war. They married young, but he was arrested, sentenced to death. She thought he had died, but then these letters began arriving years later. She was convinced he was alive, watching her." Amy scribbled notes, her mind racing. Louise's fear had been palpable. But was it truly Bosner, or was someone exploiting her past to torment her? She glanced at Poirot, who seemed to be studying Leidner's every word. His head tilted slightly, like a bird assessing its prey. Poirot turned to Richard Carey. "Monsieur Carey, you were close to Madame Leidner, were you not? Perhaps closer than most." Carey's head snapped up, his face flushing. "What are you implying? I respected Louise. She was remarkable, but my feelings were professional." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Professional, you say? Yet I observe, monsieur, that your eyes betray a certain warmth when her name is mentioned. Tell me, did you love her?" The tent fell silent. Marie Mercado's scarf slipped from her fingers and Joseph stopped pacing. Carey's jaw tightened, and for a moment Amy thought he might lunge at Poirot. Instead, he spoke through gritted teeth. "I admired her. That's all. She was beautiful, intelligent. Anyone would notice that." Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. "Admiration can become obsession, monsieur, and obsession can lead to desperate acts." Amy noted Carey's clenched fists, the way his shoulders tensed. She had seen him watching Louise, his gaze lingering. Too long, his demeanor softening in her presence. Was it love, or something darker? She wrote, "Carey possible romantic motive. Defensive." Poirot moved on to Marie Mercado. "Madam, you did not care for Madame Leidner, I think. Why was this?" Marie's lips curled into a sneer before she caught herself. "I didn't dislike her. She was difficult, always commanding attention, always making everyone jump to her tune. It was exhausting enough to wish her harm." Poirot asked, his tone mild but probing. Marie's eyes widened. "No, I would never. I mean, I didn't like her, but I didn't want her dead." Joseph stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Leave her alone. Marie's got nothing to do with this. She's just honest. That's all." Poirot's gaze flicked to Joseph, and Amy saw a spark of interest in his eyes. "Monsieur Mercado, your wife's honesty is admirable, but your agitation, it is curious. What do you fear?" Joseph's face reddened, and he muttered something about the heat before retreating to the entrance. Amy wrote, "Joseph protective of Marie." Nervous, hiding something, Poirot turned to Father Lavigny, who had remained silent, his calm demeanour almost unnerving. "Père Lavigny, you are a man of learning, of faith, yet you seem distant from this tragedy. Tell me, what is your interest in this dig, beyond the relics?" Lavigny's smile was measured. "My interest is purely academic. The inscriptions, the history, they are my purpose here. Madame Leidner's death is unfortunate, but I have no personal connection to it." Poirot's eyes lingered on him, and Amy sensed he was unconvinced. She had noticed Lavigny's late-night walks, his secretive handling of certain artifacts. She wrote, Lavigny to calm, secretive behavior. The interviews continued, with Bill Coleman offering little beyond vague anecdotes and David Emmett providing precise but guarded answers. And Johnson spoke softly, her voice shaking as she described Louise's kindness to her. But Amy noted her trembling hands and wondered if it was grief or fear as the morning wore on. Poirot dismissed the team, asking Amy to stay. They walked to Louise's room, where the crime scene remained untouched. The small space felt oppressive, the air heavy with the memory of violence. The blood-stained rug lay in the center, a stark reminder of the locked room mystery. Poirot knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the edges of the stain. "Mademoiselle Amy," he said, "you have seen much. Tell me, what is your impression of this group?" Amy hesitated, then spoke. "They're all hiding something, Monsieur Poirot. Dr. Leidner's grief seems genuine, but he's to control like he's holding back. Carrie's in love with Louise, I'm sure of it, and it's eating him up. Marie's jealousy is obvious. She hated how Louise drew everyone in. Joseph's jumpy, like he's afraid of being caught. Lavigny, I don't trust him. He's too detached, and I've seen him handling artifacts late at night. Bill's trying to act like it's all a game, but he's nervous too. David's quiet, but he watches everything. Anne's scared, but I don't know why." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Excellent, mademoiselle. Your observations are most valuable. Now, tell me more of Madame Leidner's story about this Frederick Bosner." Amy recounted Louise's confessions, the whirlwind marriage, Bosner's espionage, his supposed execution, and the threatening letters that began arriving years later. She was terrified, Amy said. She thought he was watching her, waiting to strike. But she also said he was charming, manipulative. She felt guilty, like she'd betrayed him by moving on. Poirot's fingers tapped his chin. A man from the past, presumed dead, yet casting a long shadow. And this relic, this so-called cursed artifact, its discovery coincides with her fear. Curious, none? Amy nodded, her mind turning to the relic. It was a small, intricately carved tablet, unearthed just days before Louise's death. Father Lavigny had called it a key to the gods, its cuneiform inscriptions hinting at a ritual tied to vengeance. The team's excitement had been palpable, but so had their suspicion, as if each member feared the others might claim it. Poirot stood, brushing dust from his trousers. The relic, the letters, the locked room, these are pieces of a puzzle. But the heart of it lies in the human soul. Jealousy, love, greed, these are the true motives. We must dig deeper, mademoiselle, into the hearts of those who surrounded Madame Leidner. Over the next few days, Poirot conducted more interviews, each one peeling back layers of the team's facade. Amy accompanied him, her notebook filling with observations. She noticed how Carrie avoided Dr. Leidner, his eyes burning with unspoken resentment. Marie's bitterness seemed to grow, her snide comments about Louise barely concealed. Joseph's agitation increased, especially when Poirot questioned him about his whereabouts during the murder. Lavigny remained, elusive, often disappearing, into his tent with stacks of papers. Bill's attempts at humor fell flat, and David's silence grew heavier, as if he were wrestling with a secret. Anne's fear was palpable, her eyes darting nervously whenever the relic was mentioned. One evening, as the sun set over the dig site, Poirot and Amy sat outside her tent, the air cooler but no less tense. Poirot sipped a tisane, his eyes distant. "Mademoiselle, Consider this. A woman is murdered in a locked room with no weapon found. The team is isolated, yet each has a motive. The relic, it is valuable, we. But is it the true prize? Or is it a distraction, a cover for something more personal? Amy frowned. You think the relic's theft is tied to the murder. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I think, mademoiselle, that the human heart is a labyrinth, and in this labyrinth we will find our killer. As the days passed, Amy's notes grew more detailed, her suspicions sharper. She watched Kerry linger near Louise's room, his face a mask of guilt. She overheard Marie whispering to Joseph, her voice laced with venom. She saw Lavigny slip a small object into his pocket during a late-night walk, and she noticed Dr. Leidner's grief shift, his eyes hardening when he thought no one was watching. Poirot, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on the complexity. He examined the crime scene repeatedly, measuring distances, testing the window's bars, studying the rug's blood stain. He questioned Captain Maitland about the local smugglers, learning of a network that trafficked artifacts through Erock. He spoke with Dr. Giles Riley, who confirmed Louise's nervous condition but hinted at her manipulative nature, her ability to bend others to her will. One night, Amy awoke to a faint noise, a scraping sound like stone on stone. She crept outside, her heart pounding, but saw only shadows. The next morning she told Poirot, who nodded thoughtfully. The dig site, it holds secrets beyond the relics. We must be vigilant. Mademoiselle, by the end of the week, Poirot had uncovered a web of motives: Kerry's forbidden love, Marie's jealousy, Joseph's fear of exposure, Lavigny's secretive dealings, and Leidner's complex grief. The relic, with its rumoured curse, loomed over them all, a symbol of greed and vengeance. Amy felt the weight of the mystery pressing down, but with Poirot's guidance, she sensed they were close to unearthing the truth. Chapter 8. Uncovering secrets. The sun hung low over the desert horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the archaeological dig at Hassanieh. The air was thick with dust and tension, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel heavy. Nurse Amy Letheran sat on a canvas chair outside her tent, her notebook open on her lap, though her pen hadn't touched the page in nearly an hour. Her eyes scanned the camp, taking in the weary figures moving about their tasks, diggers hauling baskets of earth, archaeologists hunched over their finds, and the ever-present hum of suspicion that had settled over the team since Louise Leidner's murder. Now, within Johnson's death, the camp felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Amy's mind churned over the events of the past few days. Louise, with her haunting beauty and nervous terrors, had been found dead in her locked room, a single blow to the head ending her life. The mystery of the locked room had baffled everyone, including Captain Maitland, whose preliminary investigation had turned up nothing but a blood-stained rug and more questions. Then, just when the team thought the horror had peaked and Johnson, the quiet, unassuming chemist, had collapsed after drinking what she thought was water only, it was acid. The word accident had been tossed around, but Amy didn't buy it. Neither did Hercule Poirot, who had arrived like a storm of precision. And curiosity, his sharp eyes missing nothing, Amy glanced toward Poirot's tent, where he was likely poring over his notes. The little Belgian detective had a way of making everyone feel exposed, as if he could see through their skin to the secrets they hid. His interviews yesterday had stirred the pot, revealing Richard Kerry's unspoken love for Louise, Marie Mercado's venomous jealousy, and Father Lavigny's odd, secretive demeanor. Amy had shared Louise's story about her first husband, Frederick Bosner, the German spy who was supposed to be dead, but whose shadow seemed to loom over the dig. The threatening letters Louise had received, the relic's so-called curse, the strange noises at night, it all pointed to something sinister. Something Amy couldn't quite piece together. As she sat there, the flap of Poirot's tent swung open, and he emerged, his black patent leather shoes absurdly polished despite the desert dust. He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun, and made his way toward Amy with that peculiar, deliberate walk of his. "Good morning, Nurse Letheran," he said, his voice crisp and accented. "You appeared deep in thought. May I join?" You, Amy nodded, closing her notebook. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I was just trying to make sense of it all. Poirot settled into a chair beside her, his small frame somehow commanding the space. Sense, mon cher, is precisely what we seek. But sense is often buried beneath layers of deception, like your artifacts in the sand. He tapped his temple. The little grey cells, they are working. And they tell me that this camp holds more secrets than relics. Amy frowned. You, Thinken's death wasn't an accident. Poirot's mustache twitched. A sign she'd come to recognize as his version of a smile. An accident? Non. To mistake acid for water requires either gross negligence or deliberate intent. And in a camp where one murder has already occurred, I do not believe in coincidences. Amy leaned forward, her voice low. But who would want him dead? She was so quiet. She kept to herself, worked on her chemical analyses, didn't bother anyone. Precisement, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The quiet ones. They are often the most dangerous or the most endangered. Mademoiselle Johnson, she knew something, perhaps, or saw something, and someone wished to ensure her silence. Amy's stomach twisted. The idea that the killer was still among them, eating meals, sharing tents, brushing past her in the narrow paths of the camp, it was almost too much to bear. Do you have any idea who it might be? She asked. Poirot raised a finger. Patience, Nurse Leverin. The truth, it reveals itself in layers, like your dig. But I will tell you this. I have my suspicions about one member of this team, a man who is not what he seems. Amy's mind raced. Father Lavigny, Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he neither confirmed nor denied. Come, he said, rising. Let us take a walk. I wish to see this dig site for myself, and perhaps we shall uncover more than pottery. The dig site sprawled across a series of low mounds, each marked with stakes and strings to indicate excavation zones. Workers moved methodically, their trowels scraping away centuries of earth to reveal fragments of a long-dead civilization. Amy and Poirot walked past a group of local labourers, their chatter falling silent as the detective passed. The team's archaeologists were scattered across the site. Richard Carey, his handsome face set in a scowl, was sketching a newly uncovered wall. David Emmett, the young assistant, was measuring a trench, and Marie Mercado, her sharp eyes darting, was sorting through a pile of pottery shards. Poirot paused near the central mound, where the so-called cursed relic had been found. The artifact, a golden statuette of a winged deity, was now locked in Dr. Leidner's office, but its discovery had sent ripples through the camp. Father Lavigny had called it a harbinger of doom, quoting some ancient text about divine wrath. Amy had thought it melodramatic at the time, but now, with two deaths, she wasn't so sure. Tell me, Nurse Leverin, Poirot said, his gaze fixed on the mound. What do you know of this Father Lavigny? Amy hesitated. Not much. He's a French priest and expert in ancient languages. He's been translating cuneiform tablets, helping identify the relics. But he's odd, keeps to himself, always scribbling in his notebook. And he's got this way of looking at you like he's weighing your soul. Poirot nodded slowly. A priest, you say? And yet, his hands, they are not the hands of a man who spends his days in prayer. They are calloused like those of a labourer. Or a thief. Amy's breath caught. A thief. Poirot held up a hand. A hypothesis, nothing more. But I have made inquiries. The real Father Lavigny, a scholar of some repute, was last seen in France, preparing for a journey to Iraq. Yet our Father Lavigny arrived without fanfare, with papers that are, shall we say, convenient. I wonder if he is truly who he claims to be. Amy's mind flashed to the relic, the way Lavigny had hovered over it, his eyes gleaming with something more than scholarly interest. You think he's here for the artifacts, to steal them? It is possible, Poirot said. The relic, it is valuable, worth a fortune to the right buyer, and a man posing as a priest, with access to the dig's most precious finds, would be well placed to make such treasures disappear. They continued their walk, circling the mound. Amy's thoughts were a jumble of fear and suspicion. If Livigny wasn't a priest, who was he, and could he be the killer? She glanced at Poirot, who seemed lost in thought, his eyes scanning the ground as if it held the answers to every question. They reached the edge of the site, where a small tent served as a storage area for tools and lesser finds. Poirot stopped, his gaze falling on a crate of pottery shards. He knelt, picking up a fragment and turning it over in his hands. Curious, he murmured, "What is it?" Amy asked, peering over his shoulder. "This shard," Poirot said, holding it to the light. "It is not like the others. The clay, it is too smooth, too perfect. A modern creation, perhaps, meant to pass as ancient." Amy's eyes widened. "A forgery, perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps a test. Someone in this camp is playing. A game, Nurse Leverin. A game of deception with the relic at its heart." That afternoon, Poirot gathered the team in the common tent for what he called a discussion of progress. The air was thick with unease as they took their seats. Dr. Leidner, his face haggard with grief, Richard Carey, avoiding everyone's gaze, Marie Mercado, her lips pursed in a thin line, David Emmett, his usual calm replaced by a nervous fidgeting, Bill Coleman, trying to lighten the mood with a forced grin, Joseph Mercado, pale and sweating, and Father Livigny, his dark eyes unreadable. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mzamis," he began, "we are gathered in the shadow of tragedy. Two women are dead, and the truth remains buried. But Hercule Poirot does not allow the truth to remain hidden for long." He paced slowly, his voice steady. "Let us consider the facts. Madame Leidner was killed in a locked room with no weapon found. Mademoiselle Johnson died by acid, which was no accident. And in the background, we have this relic of treasure that has brought out greed, envy, and perhaps murder." Dr. Leidner's voice cracked as he spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, you can't think the relic has anything to do with this. It's just an artifact, a piece of history." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "History, monsieur, is often a motive for murder. And this relic, it is not merely history, it is wealth, power, temptation. Someone in this camp desired it enough to kill." Marie Mercado's voice was sharp. "Are you accusing us? We're archaeologists, not criminals." Poirot turned to her, his gaze piercing. "And yet, madam, crime knows no profession. Tell me, what did you think of Madame Leidner?" Marie's face flushed. She was difficult, always drawing attention, always making trouble. "But I didn't kill her, and Mademoiselle Johnson." Poirot pressed. Marie faltered. I hardly knew her. She was quiet, always in her lab." Poirot nodded, turning to Father Livigny. "And you, mon père, you were close to the relic. Did you, perhaps, see something in it that others did not?" Livigny's expression remained calm, but Amy noticed. His hands tightened around his notebook. "I saw only its historical value," he said. "As a scholar, my interest is in knowledge, not wealth." Poirot smiled faintly. "Knowledge, oui, and yet knowledge can be a dangerous thing." The meeting ended with no confessions, but Amy could feel the tension crackling in the air. As the team dispersed, Poirot pulled her aside. "Nurse Leverin, I have a task for you. Watch Father Livigny. Note his movements, his habits. If he's who I suspect, he will make a mistake soon." That night, Amy couldn't sleep. The dessert was silent, save for the occasional howl of a distant jackal. She sat up in her cot, her mind replaying Poirot's words: a thief, a forgery, a killer. It all seemed to circle back to the relic, but how and why Anne? She had no connection to the artifact, no reason to be a target unless, as Poirot suggested, she'd seen something. She shouldn't have. Amy slipped on her shoes and stepped outside. The cool night air a relief after the stuffy tent. The camp was dark, the only light coming from a lantern in Father Livigny's tent. She crept closer. Keeping to the shadows, through the tent flap, she saw him hunched over a table, his notebook open. He was sketching something, a diagram of the dig site, with markings that looked like a map. Beside it was a small clay tablet, identical to those found at the site, but its edges were too clean, too new. Her heart pounded. Poirot was right. Livigny was up to something. She stepped back, intending to report to Poirot. When a hand grabbed her arm, she stifled a scream, spinning to find David Emmett, his face pale in the moonlight. "What are you doing out here?" he whispered. I couldn't sleep," Amy stammered. "What about you?" David's eyes flicked to Lavigny's tent, saying, "Something's not right about this place. Ever since that relic was found, it's like we're all cursed." Amy forced a smile, her pulse still racing. "It's just nerves, David. Go back to bed." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on Lavigny's tent before he turned away. Amy waited until he was gone, then hurried to Poirot's tent. She found him awake, sitting at a small desk with a cup of tisane. "Nurse Letheron," he exclaimed, setting down his cup, "you look as if you have seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Amy said, breathless. "Father Lavigny, he's sketching a map of the dig, and he's got a tablet that looks like a forgery. I think you're right, he's not a priest." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Excellent work, mon cher. You have confirmed my suspicions. Our Father Lavigny is, in fact, Raoul Meunier, a notorious thief known for stealing artifacts across Europe. He has been posing as a priest to gain access to the dig, replacing valuable relics with forgeries to sell on the black market." Amy's jaw dropped. "But does that mean he killed Louise and Anne?" Poirot shook his head. "None. I do not think so. Meunier is a thief, not a murderer. His goal is profit, not bloodshed. But his presence here complicates matters. Someone else in this camp killed Madame Leidner and Mademoiselle Johnson, and I believe it is tied to Madame Leidner's past and the relic." Amy sank onto a chair, her mind reeling. "Louise's past? You mean Frederick Bosner?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or someone connected to him. Madame Leidner spoke of threatening letters, of a husband who was supposed to be dead. But what if he is not? Or what if someone else seeks revenge in his name? We must dig deeper, Nurse Letheron. The truth is close." The next morning, Poirot confronted Lavigny, or rather, Raoul Meunier in front of the team. The revelation sent shockwaves through the camp. Meunier tried to deny it, but Poirot produced a telegram from France, confirming the real Father Lavigny's whereabouts. Faced with the evidence, Meunier admitted to forging artifacts but swore he had no part in the murders. "I'm a thief, yes," he said, his accent slipping from polished French to something rougher. "But I don't kill. I came for the relics. Nothing more." Poirot nodded, dismissing him to Captain Maitland's custody. "You are a thief, Monsieur Meunier, but not our murderer. Your crimes are of a different sort." As Meunier was led away, Amy watched the team's reactions. Dr. Leidner looked shattered, as if the betrayal had broken something inside him. Richard Carey's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the ground. Marie Mercado's smirk suggested she'd suspected something all along. And David Emmett, standing at the edge of the group, seemed oddly detached, as if he'd known more than he let on. Amy turned to Poirot. "What now?" "Now," Poirot said, "we focus on the murders. The relic was a distraction, a lure to draw our attention. But the true motive lies in Madame Leidner's past and the heart of her killer. We are close, Nurse Letheron. Very close." The days that followed were a blur of questions and revelations. Poirot's interviews grew more pointed, his questions cutting through the team's defenses like a trowel well through sand. Amy watched, her notebook filling with observations, Marie's sharp tongue, Joseph's nervous tics, Bill's forced cheer, David's quiet intensity. Each had a motive, each had opportunity, but none felt quite right. Poirot, meanwhile, was piecing together a puzzle only he could see. He spent hours in Louise's room, examining the barred window, the blood-stained rug, the ceiling beams. He muttered about methods and misdirection, his little grey cells working overtime. Amy began to notice small details she'd overlooked. A faint scratch on the window frame, a loose floorboard near Louise's bed, a strange weight to the rug that hadn't been there before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot called Amy to his tent. "Nurse Letheron," he said, his voice grave, "I have a theory, but it is dangerous, and I need your help to prove it." Amy's heart raced. "What do you need me to do?" I need you to recall every detail of Madame Leidner's fears, the face at the window, the threatening letters, the noises at night. And I need you to watch one person in particular, someone who has been too careful, too perfect in their grief, who, Amy asked, though she already suspected. Poirot's eyes met hers. Dr. Leidner. The camp settled into an uneasy routine, but Amy couldn't shake Poirot's words. Dr. Leidner, the devoted husband. The grieving widow, could he be the killer? His love for Louise had seemed so genuine, his pain so raw, and yet Poirot's suspicions gnawed at her. She began to watch him closely, noting his late-night walks, his whispered conversations with David Emmett, where his hands trembled when he spoke of Louise. One night, unable to sleep, Amy slipped out of her tent and followed Dr. Leidner to the dig site. He stood alone by the central mound, staring at the spot where the relic had been found. His face was unreadable, but his posture was tense, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Amy ducked behind a crate, her breath shallow. She didn't know what she expected to see, but the weight of Poirot's suspicions made every shadow feel like a threat. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged, David Emmett. The two men spoke in low tones, their words indistinguishable. Amy strained to hear, but the desert wind carried their voices away. She crept closer, her heart pounding when a hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled, but the grip was strong. Quiet, a voice hissed. It was Poirot. He pulled her into the shadows, his eyes blazing. "You are reckless, Nurse Leverin, but brave. Did you see anything?" "Dr. Leidner and David," she whispered. "They're talking by the mound." Poirot nodded, as I suspected. There is a connection between them, a secret they share. But we must be careful. The killer is watching, and he is clever. The next day, Poirot gathered the team once more. This time in Louise's room, the air was heavy with anticipation as he paced before the barred window. "Zamis," he said, "we stand at the heart of the mystery. The women are dead, and the answers lie here in this room." He pointed to the window. Madame Leidner spoke of a face at the window, a terror that haunted her. But the bars, they are intact, the lock secure. How then did the killer enter? The team exchanged uneasy glances. Dr. Leidner's face was pale, his hands clasped tightly. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "you can't think one of us." Poirot raised a hand. "I think, monsieur, that the truth is simpler than it seems. The killer did not enter through the window. The killer was already here in this room, with Madame Leidner, and the method of her death, it was not a blow from a weapon, but something far more ingenious." Amy's mind raced. The blood-stained rug, the loose floorboard, the strange weight, she saw it now. The pieces falling into place. The rug, she blurted. "There's something under it." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Precisement, Nurse Leverin. You have seen what others have missed." He knelt, lifting the rug to reveal a trapdoor, barely visible in the floorboards. The team gasped as he opened it, revealing a narrow space beneath large enough to hide a mechanism. Wait, a pulley system. This, Poirot said, is how the murder was done. A heavy object, dropped from above, through a concealed panel. In the ceiling, the killer needed only to be in the right place at the right time. Dr. Leidner's voice was hoarse. "But why? Why would anyone do this?" Poirot turned to him, his gaze unrelenting. "Why, monsieur? Because of love. Because of betrayal. Because of a past that would not stay buried." The revelation of the trapdoor sent the camp into chaos. Accusations flew, and the team's fragile unity crumbled. Poirot, undeterred, continued his investigation, his questions growing sharper, his observations more precise. Amy watched as he unraveled the threads of the mystery, each clue bringing them closer to the truth. She thought of Louise's fear, her stories of Frederick Bosner, the husband who was supposed to be dead. She thought of Johnson, quiet and unassuming, who had died because she knew too much. And she thought of Dr. Leidner, his grief masking something darker. Something Poirot was determined to expose. As the sun set over the desert, Amy knew. The final confrontation was coming. The killer was among them, and Poirot's little grey cells were closing in. The relic, the forgeries, the murders, it was all connected. and the truth was about to be unearthed like a relic from the sand. Chapter 9. Uncovering secrets. Sun hung low over the barren hills of Hassanieh, casting long shadows across the archaeological dig site. The air was thick with dust, stirred by the restless wind that seemed to carry whispers of the past. Nurse Amy Leithner sat on a crate outside her tent, her notebook open on her lap, though her pen had long since stilled. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her. Louise Leidner's murder, the eerie tension among the dig team, and now in Johnson's shocking death by acid. Mistaken for water, the camp, once a place of academic fervor, had become a cauldron of suspicion and fear. Amy's practical nature urged her to make sense of it all, but the pieces refused to fit. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive detective with the meticulous mustache, had taken to pacing the perimeter of the dig site, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He had arrived only days ago, summoned by Dr. Giles Riley to unravel the lock-trim mystery of Louise's death. But the second tragedy had escalated the urgency of his task. Amy watched him now, his small figure cutting a striking silhouette against the fading light. He paused occasionally, tilting his head as if listening to the desert itself, his little grey cells no doubt working furiously. Amy closed her notebook and stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. She had promised Poirot she would recount every detail she could recall about Louise's final days, and the weight of that responsibility pressed on her. Louise had been a complex woman, beautiful, magnetic, and haunted by fears she could barely articulate. Her tales of threatening letters from a long-dead husband had seemed fantastical at first, but now, with two deaths on the dig, Amy wondered if there was truth to them after all. As she approached Poirot, he turned, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that made her feel he could see straight through her thoughts. "Mademoiselle Amy," he said, his voice precise and accented, "you have the look of one who carries a burden. Come, walk with me and let us unburden your observations." They strolled toward the main excavation trench, where workers had paused their labor to mourn Johnson. The relic, that cursed artifact unearthed days ago, lay under guard in a locked crate, its presence a silent accusation. Amy recounted her memories of Louise's behavior, her nervous glances, her insistence that someone was watching her, and her cryptic mentions of Frederick Bosner, the German spy she believed was dead. She was so sure it was him, Amy said, her voice low. She'd wake in the night, convinced she saw a face at her window. But how could it be? He died years ago, didn't he? Poirot's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. The dead, mademoiselle, do not always remain so in the minds of the living, and sometimes they are not so dead as we are led to believe. He paused, his gaze drifting to the tent where Father Levickny spent his days deciphering ancient inscriptions. "Tell me, what do you make of our learned priest?" Amy hesitated. Father Levickny was an enigma, quiet, scholarly, with a reserved demeanor that bordered on aloofness. He had joined the dig to study the cuneiform tablets, but his knowledge seemed to extend beyond ancient languages. To a keen awareness of the team's undercurrents, he keeps to himself mostly, she said, but he's always watching, like he's waiting for something. I caught him once, late at night, near the relic storage. He said he was checking the inventory, but it felt off. Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing his mustache. "Oui, the good father is a man of secrets, and secrets, mademoiselle, are the currency of murder." The conversation was interrupted by a shout from the main tent. David Emmett, the young assistant archaeologist, emerged, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, you need to see this." He held a small leather pouch, its contents jingling faintly as he extended it. Poirot took it with a delicate touch, as if it were a bomb about to detonate. Inside were fragments of clay tablets, replicas, not originals, their edges to smooth, their inscriptions to perfect. Forgeries, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "And where, Monsieur Emmett, did you find these?" "In Father Levickny's trunk," David said, his voice tight. "I was moving some equipment and noticed his tent flap was open. These were tucked under his cot. They're copies of the relics we've been cataloguing." Amy's heart sank. The relic, the one said to be cursed, had been the centerpiece of the dig's recent excitement. Its discovery had drawn attention from scholars across the region, and its rumored value had sparked whispers of theft and betrayal. If Father Lavigny was involved in a scheme to replace it with fakes, what else might he be hiding? Poirot dismissed David with a nod and turned to Amy. We must confront the father, but with care. A man who deals in deception is a man who fears exposure. They found Father Lavigny in his tent, bent over a tablet with a magnifying glass, his face serene. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. Monsieur Poirot, Nurse Leverin. To what do I owe this visit? Poirot held up the pouch, letting the clay fragments catch the light. These, monsieur, were found in your possession. Forgeries designed to deceive. I would have your explanation. S'il vous plaît. The priest's composure faltered, his hands tightening on the table. For a moment, Amy thought he might bolt, but he sighed instead, his shoulders slumping. I am not Father Lavigny, he admitted, his voice low. My name is Raoul Menier. I am an antiquities dealer, shall we say. I was hired to authenticate the relics, but I saw an opportunity. The real artifacts are safe, hidden in a cache, near the river. I intended to sell them and replace them with these. Amy gasped, her mind reeling. A thief posing as a priest right under their noses, but Poirot's expression remained calm, almost amused. A clever scheme, Monsieur Menier. But tell me, did your plans include murder? Menier's eyes widened. Murder? No. I am a thief, not a killer. I had nothing to do with Madame Leidner's death or Mademoiselle Johnson's. My only crime is greed. Poirot studied him, his gaze piercing. Greed is a powerful motive, but I believe you. Your hands are stained with ink, not blood. But you will tell me everything, every contact, every plan, the truth, monsieur, or I shall ensure the authorities know of your extracurricular activities. Menier nodded, defeated, and began to recount his scheme. He had been approached by a buyer in Baghdad, a shadowy figure who promised a fortune for the relic. Menier's role was to authenticate it, then swap it for a forgery before it could be shipped to a museum. He swore he had worked alone, with no knowledge of the murder's daughters. They left the tent. Amy's mind churned. If he's not the killer, then who is? She asked. Louise was so sure it was her husband, Frederick. But he's dead, isn't he? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The past, mademoiselle, is a shadow that lingers. Louise's fear was real, but was it of a ghost, or a man who never truly died? We must dig deeper into the hearts of those closest to her. They returned to the main tent, where the dig team had gathered, their faces a mix of grief and suspicion. Dr. Eric Leidner sat at the head of the table, his eyes red-rimmed, his devotion to Louise still evident in his slumped posture. Richard Carey, the handsome archaeologist, avoided eye contact, his hands fidgeting. Marie Mercado's lips were pursed, her gaze darting between her husband, Joseph, and the others. Bill Coleman, the young surveyor, tried to lighten the mood with a forced joke, but it fell flat. David Emmett stood by the door, his expression unreadable, while Sheila Riley, the doctor's daughter, scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. Poirot took his place at the center, his presence commanding despite his small stature. Ms. Amis, he began, we are in the midst of a tragedy, but also a puzzle. 2 women are dead, and a priceless relic is at the heart of a conspiracy. Monsieur Menier has confessed to theft, but not to murder. The killer is among us, and I will find them. A murmur rippled through the group, but Poirot raised a hand. Let us consider Louise Leidner, a woman of beauty, yes, but also of secrets. She spoke of a husband, Frederick Bosner, a man she believed dead, yet her fear was not of a ghost, but of a man who watched her, who wrote her letters. Why? To torment her or to silence her? Amy watched the team's reactions. Dr. Leidner's face paled, his hands gripping the table. Richard Carey's jaw tightened, and Marie Mercado's eyes flashed with something like fear. Poirot continued, his voice steady, and Mademoiselle Johnson, her death was no accident. The acid was placed where she would drink it, by someone who knew her habits. This was a crime of precision, of calculation. The air grew heavier, the team's unease palpable. Amy's mind raced back to Louise's final days of fear. Her insistence that someone was watching her. She had mentioned a face at the window, a shadow in the night. Amy had dismissed it as nerves, but now she wondered. Had Louise seen something real? Someone who knew her past, someone who wanted her dead. Poirot turned to Dr. Leidner. Monsieur, you loved your wife deeply, did you not? Yet love can be a mask for darker motives. Tell me, what did you know of her fears? Leidner's voice was hoarse. She was terrified, yes, but I thought it was her imagination. She spoke of Frederick, but I told her he was dead. I tried to protect her, to keep her safe, protect her. Poirot repeated, his tone sharp, or to keep her. Silent? Leidner flinched and Amy felt a chill. Could Dr. Leidner, so devoted, so heartbroken, be hiding something? Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. The relic, the letters. The murders, they are connected, not by a curse, but by human greed and vengeance. Tomorrow we shall reconstruct the night of Louise's death. Every detail, every movement. The truth will not hide forever. As the meeting dispersed, Amy lingered, her thoughts a tangle of clues and suspicions. She approached Poirot, her voice low. Monsieur Poirot, do you think Louise's husband is really alive? Could he be here among us? Poirot's eyes twinkled, but his voice was grave. The past, mademoiselle, is a puzzle with many pieces. Some are buried deep, but they are not lost. We shall find them, you and I, and the truth will be revealed. The night settled over the dig site, the stars cold and distant. Amy returned to her tent, her notebook heavy in her hands. She wrote down everything: Menia's confession, Poirot's probing questions, the team's strained faces, the relic, the murders, the letters. They formed a web, and at its center was a truth she could not yet see. But Poirot's confidence was infectious. Tomorrow they would dig deeper, not into the sand, but into the secrets of those around them. The cellar was close, and Amy felt the weight of their presence, a shadow that lingered just out of sight. Chapter 10. The relic's trail sun hung low over the desolate expanse of the Hassanieh dig site, casting long shadows across the sand-swept tents and half-excavated ruins. Nurse Amy Letheran sat on a folding chair outside her tent, her notebook open on her lap, though her pen had long since stilled. The air was thick with unease, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to the dust particles floating in the fading light. Louise Leidner's murder, followed by Anne Johnson's horrific death by acid, had shattered the fragile camaraderie of the archaeological team. Now, with Hercule Poirot's arrival, every glance, every whispered conversation carried the weight of suspicion. Amy's eyes drifted to the horizon, where the jagged outlines of ancient structures stood like silent sentinels. The dig site, once a place of academic fervor, now felt like a trap, its isolation amplifying the fear that a killer still walked among them. The relic, that cursed artifact unearthed days ago, seemed to loom over everything, a golden idol, small enough to fit in one's hand, yet heavy with the promise of wealth and the shadow of death. Its disappearance this morning had only deepened the mystery, and Amy couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than a coincidence. Poirot, with his impeccable suit somehow untouched by the desert dust, had spent the morning questioning the team. His sharp eyes missed nothing, and his questions, delivered with that peculiar French accent, seemed to peel back layers of pretense. Amy had watched him closely, noting how he lingered on certain details, a glance between Richard Carey and Dr. Leidner, a nervous twitch in Marie Mercado's hands, the way David Emmett avoided direct answers. Now, as the afternoon heat pressed down, Poirot had called for a break, retreating to his tent to consult his little grey cells. Amy, however, couldn't rest. Her mind churned with the events of the past days, and she felt compelled to record every detail, as if writing it down might make sense of the chaos. She glanced at her notebook, where she jotted down Poirot's earlier observations. He'd been particularly interested in the relic's disappearance, which had occurred sometime between midnight and dawn. The artifact had been locked in a wooden crate in Dr. Leidner's office, a small room adjacent to the main tent. The lock was intact, the crate undisturbed, yet the relic was gone, replaced with a crude clay replica. Poirot had examined the crate with a magnifying glass. Muttering about precision and misdirection, Amy didn't understand his methods, but she trusted his reputation. If anyone could unravel this tangle of murder and theft, it was Hercule Poirot. The sound of footsteps crunching on the sand broke her reverie. David Emmett, the young assistant archaeologist, approached, his hands in his pockets and his face set in a grim line. "Nurse Leveron," he said, his voice low, "Poirot wants everyone in the main tent in 10 minutes. Says he's got something to show us." Amy nodded, closing her notebook. "Did he say what it was?" Emmett shook his head. "You know how he is. All mysterious, like he's playing a game only he understands. But he was poking around the storage tent earlier, looking at the tools and ropes. Kept asking about who was on watch last night." Amy's stomach tightened. The watch schedule had been a point of contention since Louise's death. Dr. Leidner had insisted on nightly patrols to protect the dig site, but the roster was haphazard, and no one seemed eager to volunteer. Last night, Emmett had been on duty, along with Bill Coleman. Amy remembered seeing Coleman stumble back to his tent at dawn, looking bleary-eyed and muttering about the cold. Emmett, on the other hand, had been unusually quiet this morning, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a guarded tension. "David," Amy said carefully, "you were on watch last night, weren't you? Did you see anything unusual?" Emmett's eyes flickered, and for a moment she thought he might dodge the question, but he sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual noises whined. Creaking tents, the odd jackal howling in the distance. I walked the perimeter every hour, like Leidner asked. Coleman was with me for the first half, but he turned in early. Said he wasn't feeling well." Amy frowned. "Early? How early?" "Round 2, maybe 3. I didn't check my watch." Emmett's tone was casual, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Look, nurse, I don't know what Poirot's getting at, but I didn't see anyone sneaking around stealing relics, if that's what he's implying. He's barking up the wrong tree." Amy didn't press further, but her mind raced. Emmett's story didn't add up. If Coleman had left the watch early, that left a window of several hours when Emmett was alone, or so he claimed. Could someone have slipped past him, or was Emmett hiding something? She made a mental note to tell Poirot later, though she suspected. He already knew more than he let on. The main tent was crowded when Amy arrived, the air thick with the scent of dust and sweat. The team sat in a loose circle on folding chairs, their faces a mix of apprehension and exhaustion. Dr. Eric Leidner sat at the head, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes hollow with grief. Beside him, Richard Carey stared at the ground, his jaw tight. Marie Mercado fidgeted with a scarf, her husband Joseph watching her with a mix of concern and irritation. Bill Coleman slouched in his chair, trying to look nonchalant but failing to hide his unease. Sheila Riley, the young typist, sat apart, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. Raoul Menier, who Amy now knew was not Father Lavigny but a thief in disguise, was conspicuously absent. Poirot had sent him to Hassanieh under guard to verify his identity with the authorities. Poirot stood at the center of the tent, his small frame commanding attention. He held a small notebook, flipping through its pages with deliberate care. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice calm but firm, "we are gathered to discuss a matter most grave. The relic. This so-called cursed artifact has vanished, and its disappearance is no mere theft. It is, I believe, intimately connected to the murders of Madame Leidner and Mademoiselle Johnson." A murmur rippled through the group. Marie Mercado gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dr. Leidner leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "Poirot, are you saying the killer stole the relic? But why? It's valuable, yes, but to risk so much—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, Monsieur Leidner. The why is precisely what we must uncover. But first, let us consider the how. The relic was locked in a crate, yes? A crate that shows no signs of tampering, yet it is gone, replaced with a forgery so crude it could not fool an expert. This suggests two possibilities. Either the thief had access to the key, or they employed a method most ingenious to bypass the lock. Amy glanced at Dr. Leidner, whose face had paled. He was the only one with a key to the office as far as she knew. But Poirot's gaze swept over the entire group, lingering on no one in particular. "I have examined the crate," he continued, "and found traces of wax along the edges. Wax, Miss Amos, is a tool of deception. It can be used to create a mold to replicate a key, or to conceal tampering. I ask you now, who among you has access to wax?" The question hung in the air. Joseph Mercado shifted uncomfortably. "We all do," he said at last. "There's wax in the storage tent for sealing artifacts. It's not exactly a secret." "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "And so, we must look not only at opportunity, but at motive. The relic's value is not merely monetary. It is a symbol, a prize that stirs greed, envy, and perhaps revenge. Madame Leidner's death, I believe, was not only about her past, but about what she knew or suspected about this relic." Amy's mind flashed back to Louise's confessions about her first husband, Frederick Bosner. The threatening letters, the fear in her eyes, could they be tied to the relic? She raised her hand, hesitating only a moment. "Monsieur Poirot, Louise told me she thought Frederick was alive. She said the letters mentioned things only he would know. Could he have come here, to the dig, for the relic?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Amy had come to recognize as approval. "A most astute observation, Mademoiselle Leverin. The letters are indeed a key. But let us consider, if Frederick Bosner is alive, where is he? Is he among us, hiding in plain sight, or does someone else use his name to Sophia?" The team exchanged uneasy glances. Richard Carey cleared his throat. "This is absurd. Bosner's been dead for years. Louise was. She was imagining things. The desert, the isolation it got to her." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Monsieur Carey, you were close to Madame Leidner, were you not? Close enough to notice her fears, her beauty, her influence. Did she ever speak to you of this Bosner?" Carey flushed, his hands clenching. "She mentioned him once or twice, said she was afraid he'd come back, but I thought it was nonsense. She was nervous, that's all." "Nervous," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "And yet, she is dead, and Mademoiselle Johnson is dead, and the relic is gone. These are not the products of mere nerves, none." The tent fell silent. Amy's heart pounded as she watched Poirot pace, his small steps deliberate, almost theatrical. He stopped suddenly, turning to Dr. Leidner. "Monsieur, you were the last to see your wife alive. Were you not? You spoke with her in her room, just before the murder. What did you discuss?" Leidner's hands trembled. We talked about the dig, about the relic. She was upset, said she didn't trust some of the team. I tried to calm her, told her it was just her imagination, and yet, Poirot said softly, she was right to fear. Someone she trusted betrayed her, someone who knew her habits, her room, her fears, someone who could move freely in this camp. Amy's mind raced. Dr. Leidner had been devoted to Louise, but his grief seemed uneven at times. She remembered the way he'd hovered over the crate, checking the lock obsessively. Could he have taken the relic himself to cover some other crime, or was it David Emmett, whose alibi for last night was shaky at best? She glanced at Emmett, who was staring at the ground, his jaw tight. Poirot clapped his hands, startling the group. "Enough speculation for now. I propose a small experiment. Tonight, we will recreate the conditions of the theft. Mademoiselle Leverin, you will assist me. We will place a decoy relic in the crate and watch. The killer, I suspect, is not finished. Greed is a powerful motivator, and they will return." The team erupted in protests. Marie Mercado's voice was shrill. "You're using us as bait. What if the killer strikes again?" Poirot smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Fear not, madam. Hercule Poirot does not leave such matters to chance. We will be watching, and the truth will reveal itself." As the meeting broke up, Amy followed Poirot to the storage tent, where he began sorting through ropes and tools. "Mademoiselle," he said without looking up, "you have a keen eye. Tell me, what have you observed about Monsieur Emmett?" Amy hesitated. then recounted Emmett's vague answers about the watch. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of a coil of rope. Interesting. And Monsieur Leidner, his grief, does it strike you as sincere? Amy frowned. He's devastated. But there's something off. He's to control sometimes, like he's holding something back. Precisement, Poirot murmured. The heart may grieve, but the mind may plot. Tonight, we will see who moves in the shadows. As night fell, the dig site took on an eerie stillness. Amy helped Poirot place a clay replica in the crate, rigged with a thin wire to alert them. If it was disturbed, they took up positions in the shadows. Amy's heart pounding as she watched the camp. The hours dragged on. The only sounds the rustle of wind and the distant howl of a jackal. Just past midnight, a figure emerged from the tents, moving stealthily toward the office. Amy's breath caught as she recognized the silhouette Dr. Leidner. Poirot's hand on her arm kept her still. They watched as Leidner approached the crate, producing a key from his pocket. But before he could open it, another figure appeared. David. Emmett, a flashlight in hand. Eric, Emmett said, his voice low but firm. What are you doing? Leidner froze, then turned, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. I was checking the crate, making sure it's secure. Emmett's eyes narrowed. At midnight, with a key you didn't tell anyone you had? The confrontation was cut short by a shout from the tents. Bill Coleman stumbled out, his face ashen. The storage tent is on fire. Chaos erupted. The team poured out, grabbing buckets and blankets to douse the flames. Poirot, unmoved, pulled Amy aside. A diversion, he whispered. The killer seeks to distract us. Stay here, watch the crate. Amy nodded, her eyes fixed on the office. The fire was quickly contained, but in the confusion she saw a shadow slip away from the camp, toward the ruins. She hesitated, then followed, her flashlight bobbing in the dark. The figure moved quickly, disappearing behind a crumbling wall. Amy crept closer, her heart in her throat, and peered around the corner. There, in the moonlight, was Roll Menia, the supposed Father Lavigny, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Before she could react, Poirot appeared beside her, his voice a low hiss. Do not move. Mademoiselle, we have caught our thief. Menia spun around, his eyes wide with panic. Poirot, I was just returning the relic, perhaps? Poirot said, stepping forward, or ensuring it reaches your buyers in Beirut? Non, Monsieur Menia. Your game is over. But the relic is not the only prize you sought, is it? Menia's face twisted, and for a moment Amy thought he might run. But Poirot's calm authority held him in place. The relic, Poirot continued, was a convenient distraction. But the murders, those were personal. And you, monsieur, are not the killer. Amy's mind reeled. If Menia wasn't the killer, then who? She thought of Leidner, caught at the crate, and Emmett, who'd been so quick to confront him. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. As Menia was restrained and the relic recovered, Poirot turned to Amy. Tomorrow, mademoiselle, we will gather the team once more. The relic's trail has led us far, but the true path, the path to the killer, lies in the human heart, and Hercule Poirot will follow it to the end. The night stretched on, the dig site silent once more, but Amy knew the worst was yet to come. The killer was close and Poirot's trap was set. She only hoped she'd survive to see it sprung. Louise was. She was imagining things. The desert, the isolation, it got to her. Poirot's eyes narrowed, and yet, Monsieur Carey, you were close to Madame Leidner, were you not? Close enough to notice her fears, her beauty, her influence. Did she ever speak to you of this Bosner? Carey flushed, his hands clenching. She mentioned him once or twice. Said she was afraid he'd come back. But I thought it was nonsense. She was nervous, that's all. Nervous, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. And yet she is dead. And Mademoiselle Johnson is dead. And the relic is gone. These are not the products of mere nerves, non. The tent fell silent. Amy's heart pounded as she watched Poirot pace, his small steps deliberate, almost theatrical. He stopped suddenly, turning to Dr. Leidner. Monsieur, you were the last to see your wife alive. Were you not? You spoke with her in her room, just before the murder. What did you discuss?" Leidner's hands trembled. We talked about the dig, about the relic. She was upset, said she didn't trust some of the team. I tried to calm her, told her it was just her imagination, and yet Poirot said softly she was right to fear. Someone she trusted betrayed her, someone who knew her habits, her room, her fears, someone who could move freely in this camp. Amy's mind raced. Dr. Leidner had been devoted to Louise, but his grief seemed uneven at times. She remembered the way he'd hovered over the crate, checking the lock obsessively. Could he have taken the relic himself to cover some other crime, or was it David Emmett, whose alibi for last night was shaky at best? She glanced at Emmett, who was staring at the ground, his jaw tight. Poirot clapped his hands, startling the group. "Enough speculation for now. I propose a small experiment. Tonight, we will recreate the conditions of the theft. Mademoiselle Leverin, you will assist me. We will place a decoy relic in the crate and watch. The killer, I suspect, is not finished. Greed is a powerful motivator, and they will return." The team erupted in protests. Marie Mercado's voice was shrill. "You're using us as bait. What if the killer strikes again?" Poirot smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Fear not, madam. Hercule Poirot does not leave such matters to chance. We will be watching, and the truth will reveal itself." As the meeting broke up, Amy followed Poirot to the storage tent, where he began sorting through ropes and tools. "Mademoiselle," he said without looking up, "you have a keen eye. Tell me, what have you observed about Monsieur Emmett?" The tent fell silent. Amy's heart pounded as she watched Poirot pace, his small steps deliberate, almost theatrical. He stopped suddenly, turning to Dr. Leidner. "Monsieur, you were the last to see your wife alive, were you not? You spoke with her in her room, just before the murder. What did you discuss?" Leidner's hands trembled. We talked about the dig, about the relic. She was upset, said she didn't trust some of the team. I tried to calm her, told her it was just her imagination, and yet Poirot said softly she was right to fear. Someone she trusted betrayed her, someone who knew her habits, her room, her fears, someone who could move freely in this camp. Amy's mind raced. Dr. Leidner had been devoted to Louise, but his grief seemed uneven at times. She remembered the way he'd hovered over the crate, checking the lock obsessively. Could he have taken the relic himself to cover some other crime, or was it David Emmett, whose alibi for last night was shaky at best? She glanced at Emmett, who was staring at the ground, his jaw tight. Poirot clapped his hands, startling the group. "Enough speculation for now. I propose a small experiment. Tonight, we will recreate the conditions of the theft. Mademoiselle Leverin, you will assist me. We will place a decoy relic in the crate and watch. The killer, I suspect, is not finished. Greed is a powerful motivator, and they will return." The team erupted in protests. Marie Mercado's voice was shrill. "You're using us as bait. What if the killer strikes again?" Poirot smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Fear not, madam. Hercule Poirot does not leave such matters to chance. We will be watching, and the truth will reveal itself." As the meeting broke up, Amy followed Poirot to the storage tent, where he began sorting through ropes and tools. "Mademoiselle," he said without looking up, "you have a keen eye. Tell me, what have you observed about Monsieur Emmett?" Amy hesitated, then recounted Emmett's vague answers about the watch. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of a coil of rope. "Interesting. And Monsieur Leidner, his grief, does it strike you as sincere?" Amy frowned. "He's devastated. But there's something off. He's to control sometimes, like he's holding something back." "Precisement," Poirot murmured. "The heart may grieve, but the mind may plot. Tonight, we will see who moves in the shadows." As night fell, the dig site took on an eerie stillness. Amy helped Poirot place a clay replica in the crate, rigged with a thin wire to alert them. If it was disturbed, they took up positions in the shadows. Amy's heart pounding as she watched the camp. The hours dragged on. The only sounds the rustle of wind and the distant howl of a jackal. Just past midnight, a figure emerged from the tents, moving stealthily toward the office. Amy's breath caught as she recognized the silhouette Dr. Leidner. Poirot's hand on her arm kept her still. They watched as Leidner approached the crate, producing a key from his pocket. But before he could open it, another figure appeared. David. Emmett, a flashlight in hand. Eric, Emmett said, his voice low but firm. What are you doing? Leidner froze, then turned, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. I was checking the crate, making sure it's secure. Emmett's eyes narrowed. At midnight? With a key you didn't tell anyone you had? The confrontation was cut short by a shout from the tents. Bill Coleman stumbled out, his face ashen. The storage tent is on fire. Chaos erupted. The team poured out, grabbing buckets and blankets to douse the flames. Poirot, unmoved, pulled Amy aside. A diversion, he whispered. The killer seeks to distract us. Stay here, watch the crate. Amy nodded, her eyes fixed on the office. The fire was quickly contained, but in the confusion she saw a shadow slip away from the camp, toward the ruins. She hesitated, then followed, her flashlight bobbing in the dark. The figure moved quickly, disappearing behind a crumbling wall. Amy crept closer, her heart in her throat, and peered around the corner. There, in the moonlight, was Roll Menia, the supposed Father Lavigny, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Before she could react, Poirot appeared beside her, his voice a low hiss. Do not move. Mademoiselle, we have caught our thief. Menia spun around, his eyes wide with panic. Poirot, I was just returning the relic, perhaps? Poirot said, stepping forward. Or ensuring it reaches your buyers in Beirut? Non, Monsieur Menia, your game is over. But the relic is not the only prize you sought, is it? Menia's face twisted, and for a moment Amy thought he might run. But Poirot's calm authority held him in place. The relic, Poirot continued, was a convenient distraction. But the murders, those were personal. And you, monsieur, are not the killer. Amy's mind reeled. If Menia wasn't the killer, then who? She thought of Leidner, caught at the crate, and Emmett who'd been. So, quick to confront him. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. As Menia was restrained and the relic recovered, Poirot turned to Amy. Tomorrow, mademoiselle, we will gather the team once more. The relic's trail has led us far, but the true path, the path to the killer, lies in the human heart, and Hercule Poirot will follow it to the end. The night stretched on. The Dick sat silent once more, but Amy knew the worst was yet to come. The killer was close, and Poirot's trap was set. She only hoped she'd survive to see it sprung.